Jason, do you have a queue of people?
Not at this point. Everybody, if you use the raise hand function down below on the screen, and then sorry about that. I was trying to do the live stream on the other screen. If you have a question, raise your hand, and Nadia or I will call on you, or go ahead and just directly ask that question to Nadia, and she'll bring it up, or I.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and bring up something that I don't see on the agenda. And I think there's been some confusion. The emails for the last month have been pretty numerous regarding the marina issue, primarily the marina at Milford. And I think there was going to be, based on the most recent emails, misunderstanding that something was going to be voted on tonight, which it is not. Most of the emails we got were where the 50-foot limit was in disfavor. We recently got a push of emails from a group who more or less support the 50-foot rule. And I think, to start with, because there's probably people listening and aren't sure whether this is a non-agenda item or not, Brad, would you and or Chris like to kind of weigh in on that as to where we are and what the rule is?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Brad Lovelace. I'm glad to fill in a couple details for everybody's consideration, and then also we've got Linda and Chris in reserve if we need to go further. But a couple of things I'd point out. One, thanks for mentioning that. I saw some email traffic that indicated there's going to be a vote today, and there's not. We have a formal process that ensures that we take time and give plenty of opportunity for the commissioners to learn what's going on, for the public to give their input. So it extends over at least 3 meetings if you all are going to take action. So nothing happens very fast, and that's by design. So no vote, just like you said, Chairman Lauber. Secondly, it's important to point out, we try to make our marina contracts as consistent as possible. We're trying to run like a business, and consistency is important. In each of the marina contracts we have across Kansas, it says that the owner of that marina has the right to exclude fishermen from 50 feet away from those structures. That's for safety, to protect the private properties there and that's there and all that. We recognize that across the state, marina operators manage this differently. Each circumstance is different. Demands at different reservoirs are changed across the state. And so we rely on marina operators to develop plans that work in conjunction with all the users in the lake and the people that rent those slips and all that. So they do have that 50-foot exclusion area in their contract, but each one implements that differently. And we work with them to try to make that compatible with other users of the lake. And we continue to work with the marina operators at Milford to accomplish that. We know we're not where we need to be just now, but we're working on that with them. And the last thing I'd mention is we saw some emails where some folks indicated that Wildlife Parks and Tourism is encouraging people to comment this way or that way, and we by no means are. We are interested in the public input, just like Chairman Lauber just said. We always value that and appreciate that, but we are not pushing people one way or the other. We're interested in an open dialogue, sharing information, making good decisions over time. So that concludes my comments, Chairman Lauber.
Okay. Chris or Linda, do you have anything at this time?
all I would say, this is Linda Lanterman, Director of State Parks. We are working with the marina operators to make sure that we try to get some resolution.
Chris Tymason, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay. From a commercial perspective, in a former life when I was employed, I did a business with several marinas on lakes, some of which were state park, some of which had their lease through the Corps. And this battle is an uncommon one. And while most marina operators have that there, it just doesn't seem to come up. And most marina operators would like to have people come a little closer so they'll spend more money. This has been kind of a festering issue down at Milford for a while, and I'm disappointed that it's there. But maybe given time, there can be some resolution. And it's just, there isn't a law. There isn't much we can do. There's leases all over the state of Kansas, and we've done our best to try to accommodate everybody. So I think that's probably all we need to say about that. And we'll see if there are some public comments this afternoon or this evening when we open up. And Brad, you may have to repeat what you said again.
Okay, I'm fine with that, Chairman Lauber, Brad Lovelace, and I think Jason may have picked up some current comments.
Yeah, we have a Jack Poole that wants to say a comment from the public. Jack, I'm going to unmute you now.
Yeah, this is Jack. I was just going to comment, at least the information that I had was that there was going to be discussions about allowing people to come fish at the different docks and the slips throughout the marina. And I, as a slip owner of 4 slips at Hillsdale, I personally don't want the public thinking they can wander around and fish at any old slip they want and come getting near my boats and my other equipment and the other stuff I have. I protect that. I pay a lot of money for that, and I don't want people doing that. So I wanted to make a comment about that because I feel pretty strong about that.
Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
All right. Anybody else? Jason?
As far as I know, I'm not seeing any hands raised or any comments in the comment. Nadia, do you see anything on your end?
No, I do not.
Okay, I would have predicted more based on the volume of emails, but that's fine. Let's move on. Let's start now with the agency state and fiscal status. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Lauber. This is Brad Lovelace, Secretary. So a couple updates. The legislature will return next week to take action on the fiscal year 22 budget. We don't expect changes to our EDIF apportionment or to our budget request. We held static with our request for next year as with our fiscal year 21 budget. So we have no indications that we won't get what we asked for from the legislature. As far as park fee funds, our fiscal year 20 revenue was up 36% from fiscal year 19. So that was good news. This fiscal year, we've consistently seen a month-over-month increase in revenue throughout this whole fiscal year 21 as we come to a close here in a few months when compared with fiscal year 20. So that's really good news. And that puts us up about 60% over where we were at in fiscal year 20. So we're really pleased about that. Current cash balance is about $5.5 million. And so we're looking good. Linda and all her parks folks are really doing a great job. Our volumes are continuing to be high, just like they were last year. And so we're optimistic about another good year this year. cabin revenue was up 10% in fiscal year 20 versus fiscal year 19. And for fiscal year 21, we're at right now, our revenues are about 60% over where they were in 20. So that tracks really well with park fee funds in general and how much they're up over previous years. Lastly, for our wildlife fee funds, we're up about 11% over where we were this time last year. Our current balance is 14.8 million. And so that's good. That's what we like to see. Both as we project forward, and we mentioned this a little bit in our last commission meeting, we always are on the edge of our seats waiting to hear from the federal government about the Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson fish and wildlife funds and what their projections are for the revenues in those funds. Both are projected to be up, not enormous amounts, but significant for us. Very welcome news for us. So now our job is to generate funds in Kansas so we can leverage those federal funds and get them here to do some good. So that concludes my comments. I would be glad to stand for questions, Chairman Lauber.
Are there any questions for Brad? Well, hearing none, I guess we'll move on. The 2021 legislature. Chris?
Mr. Chairman, Chris Tymason. As the secretary noted, we are almost to the veto session, which is the last approximately 10 days, depending on how long they take. They're starting on Monday this week. Typically, they've started on a Wednesday before. There are a lot of moving parts also at this point, but most of the bills that have seen action or not seen action are likely done. There are still a few things, but nothing's ever over. I've got a number of bills that I'll run down really briefly. There was a Senate Bill 101 that dealt with e-bikes and regulation of e-bikes, which our agency already has authority to do. And so that was not something, it was something we were following, but had really no impact on how we manage our operations. And that one of those bills, there were two, there was a House bill and a Senate bill, and one of them passed the Senate, went over into the House, and then didn't see any action, and then the House bill didn't see any action. So I think that issue's done. Senate Bill 142 was a department initiative, and it deals with personal flotation devices, and the agency needs to update our regulations, but we couldn't update our regulations related to personal flotation devices to comply with federal law until we got this bill passed. That was signed by the governor on April 21st. And so we will begin the process likely at the next commission meeting of working towards amending those regulations that are necessary. Also included in that bill, in that process, was an update to the American Fisheries Society. There's a reference to the American Fisheries Society publications, and it was formerly Senate Bill 160. And that was lumped together in a conference committee report. And so that also becomes effective. It's on the governor's signature and then on publication in the Kansas Register. Senate Bill 145 was a land purchase, a department initiative on a land purchase in Kingman County. That bill passed the Senate 33-7, was referred to House Appropriations, and has had no action since. Let's see. Senate Bill 225 would have placed the agency law enforcement personnel into KP&F, Kansas Police and Fire Retirement. That bill had a hearing and did not have action after that. Senate Bill 269 was the next rendition of dangerous regulated animals. That bill had a hearing in March and then did not receive action after that. The ERO we've talked about, but as of March 26th, I think was the effective date, neither house of the legislature took action, and neither chamber of the legislature took action. And so therefore the governor's executive reorganization order became effective on March 26th. So as of July 1, the tourism division of the agency will be transferring to the Department of Commerce and become the Division of Tourism there. House Bill 2025. It started out as a focus on department employees. Two sections of the bill. One dealt with department employees and noxious weed employees of counties, saying they couldn't go onto private land without a search warrant. And then there was a second section of a bill that dealt with cameras for all law enforcement and using those cameras without a search warrant. That bill had a hearing, went out on the floor, got sent back to committee. They stripped out the second portion of the bill and part of the first portion and left it basically so department law enforcement employees couldn't enter private property without a search warrant unless one of three exceptions to the search warrant case law existed. That bill went back out on the floor and it was defeated. I think the vote was 48. It wasn't a recorded vote. So I think they had 48 in favor, if I recall correctly. So that bill failed. House Bill 2032 was making the use of artificial light for the purpose of spotting, locating, taking wildlife unlawful. I believe Matt's going to talk about that bill a little bit in his presentation, but it was in response to action by the commission to allow the artificial light for coyotes, essentially. Although I think the bill as drafted would have gone farther than that and impacted fur bear hunting. That bill did not get a hearing. There is a bill that deals with rules and regs that we were following that I think is really important. House Bill 2087. That bill is about 3/4 of the way through the process. It came out of the House, went to the Senate, was amended in the Senate, and is now on Senate general orders. I'm unclear whether that's going to move forward, but hopeful. House Bill 2089 dealt with hunter education in the schools. We already have hunter education in schools, 65 to 70, depending on the year, number of schools that have it. This would have mandated school districts either have Eddie Eagle for grades 1 to 8 or hunter education from grades 6 to 12 if they were going to offer a firearm safety program. We also have a couple other programs that might fit that. We asked for an amendment. That passed the House 75 to 47, passed the Senate 31 to 7. The governor vetoed it on the 22nd of April. So next week, when we start talking about next week and how things are moving forward, the governor issued a number of vetoes. I think that there will be attempts, obviously, to override those, especially if they're really close votes. This one had 75. And then on the second go around on the conference committee report at 79. So it's a little closer. House Bill 2284 dealt with fees at state parks and would have given 50% discount for seniors on campsites and cabins. We estimate that would have cost about $1 million, and the bill didn't get a hearing, didn't go anywhere. 2331 was transferable deer permits. That bill had a hearing back in February and did not move out of committee. 2336 would have made it unlawful to shoot a decoy under the control of law enforcement, a wildlife decoy. That bill had a hearing, went out of committee, got onto the House calendar, and then did not make it past turnaround the first time. So that means it was dead, stricken from the calendar by the rules of the legislature. House Bill 2392 would have given free lifetime hunting, fishing, fur harvesting licenses to any Kansas Army or Air National Guard veteran who served 20 years and was honorably discharged. That bill had a hearing March 17th and didn't move after that. And I think that's probably it. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them at this time.
I have a couple of questions. The personal flotation devices, are there changes that are going to affect Kansans out of that different than what we had now, particularly among youth?
So youth are still required to wear a life jacket if they're 12 and under on board. The legislature did make a small change, which is in conformance with federal law, which if you're in the cabin or under deck, you don't have to wear it. That's a safety concern if the boat were to capsize and trap somebody with the life jacket. All life jackets that are currently serviceable and in use stay serviceable and use. What happened is the federal government has adopted a new nomenclature, descriptor of how life jackets are classified, and we're going to have to conform to that, and that's the purpose of the change, because the law referred to an old type in statute, and so we had to get that changed before we can now come back and change the regulations. We're going to have plenty of conversation on this. It's going to take at least 3 or 4 commission meetings.
Okay. And on e-bikes, what was the issue about e-bikes?
It was whether or not municipalities and counties had authority to regulate classes of e-bikes and how they would regulate them. And there were some prescriptive things in there that they couldn't regulate them in certain fashions. For us, it had no impact. It was a peripheral issue that we watched because we already have authority to regulate that on our own properties.
Was it a push to liberalize the use of e-bikes?
You could read it that way, yes, in some ways. You could also read it the opposite way. I think it was we did not weigh in. We didn't take a position on it. As I looked at it, it appeared to be a fairly balanced bill.
Okay, are there any other questions for Chris? Any questions from the public? Lauren? You need to unmute. There you go.
My apologies. SB 145, there's still a chance that appropriations can move that along? What's the likelihood of what's going to happen there? Any idea, Chris?
This is Chris Timus, and I'll address the technical aspects, and then I'll pass it over to the secretary, and he can give his perspective on where we think we are. From the procedural perspective, there is a possibility that it can happen still. It would have to be placed, I think, in the budget bill. The bill there are lots of ways to get things through the legislature. You have to know the rules. And in this case, this is an exempt bill, which means it's exempt from all the deadlines because it was introduced in one of 3 committees: Appropriations or Ways and Means, Tax, and Fed and State. And those are the 3 committees. So if a bill is introduced there, it can continue to work past those deadlines, like that first deadline and where things got stricken from the calendar, or the deadline 3 weeks ago. So the bill itself could move forward in its own fashion. I think that's a difficult proposition given the overall scheme of what's happening with vetoes and focus on budgets and things like that we're peripheral to that. We're very small compared to those other issues. It could also be placed in the appropriations bill. And I think that that's a more likely procedural method than the standalone bill. And then I'll ask the secretary for comments.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This is Brad Lovelace. We have been watching this and pushing it, and we have a number of legislators that are trying to support this and help it move through. our preference would have been kind of a more natural route would have been to add this to another bill that had to do with land acquisition. That was very natural. Then it would have gone before the whole House on a vote. But we weren't able to do that. There weren't that many of those bills. Time was coming short. So when we talked with leadership in the House, they said, as Chris said, plan to put it in as part of appropriations, kind of a part of the budgeting process. So that's the latest we've heard. We haven't heard anybody say, no, we don't think it'll go. The people we've talked to have been optimistic that it'll continue to move forward, but there's not a lot we can do right now other than continue to have conversations and encourage legislators to be supportive of this. And that's what we hear. People think it's a good idea. Our folks have made a good case for it. We've been consistent and thoughtful in the way we've gone through the process locally in Kingman County for this. And everybody seems to be in favor of this. The challenge is, as Chris has alluded to, now time is getting short. They're having to deal with big issues that are pretty complex, and we're just hopeful this doesn't get lost in the shuffle. But we have some assurances that people said they'll do their best, put this in the budget portion, and have it be carried that way. So we're still optimistic, as Chris said, that it'll move forward. We just don't know exactly how or when.
Thank you. I have one other question. There was some stuff that affected us through a claims against the state bill. Did anything ever happen with that? I don't remember the number, bill number. Is there any updates on that or not really?
Chris Tymeson again, or Mr. Secretary, would you like to?
Why don't you start, Chris? I'll help if you need me.
Chris Tymeson, Senate Bill 159 is what the bill number was. There's a process by which claims against the state are paid. A person files a claim, it goes to what's called the Joint Claims Committee. They adjudicate that claim and have a hearing and then make a recommendation or don't recommend it. And if it makes a recommendation, then it goes into a bill form that both sides of the legislature have to pass. So in particular, you're asking about a claim regarding $16,001 in response to a set of antlers. And that claim was filed with that Joint Claims Committee. The Joint Claims Committee did not recommend that favorably. The Joint Claims Bill was introduced. There was also an attempt to place that $16,000 claim into the general budget, which failed. There was an attempt, and it was successful, to amend it into the Joint Claims Bill, Senate Bill 159. What typically happens in this process is the budget, they'll take and consolidate the Joint Claims Bill into the budget, so they have one budget bill. This particular claim caused some resentment and hardship with folks on both sides, and they could not come to agreement as to the claim. So they split that bill, Senate Bill 159, back out, and they still have to work on coming to agreement on that bill. So that claim is still alive.
Thank you.
Is it likely that claim will go anyplace?
Mr.
Secretary? Yeah.
Brad Lovelace, yep, I can comment a little on that. We are having plenty of conversations around that. We've had numerous legislators reach out and tell us that based on the clear decision that the committee made against awarding that money, that a lot of legislators are telling us that they went through the process. The answer is no, it should still be no. However, as Chris alluded to, there's a lot of nooks and crannies in the legislative process, and there are still those that are trying to move this through and get this paid. We feel like there's a lot of legislators, well, I know there are because they've contacted us, who don't feel like that's an appropriate claim, and they're watching to try to not allow it to go through. So, but I would not bet any money on either outcome at this point. It's definitely in play, and there are forces on both sides at work. So that's kind of the most we know right now.
Well, I would encourage the department to resist to the extent you can, because the claim is without merit. Is there any other comments from the commission or the public? Okay, hearing none, let's move into the general discussion area. And we're going to start with fishing regulations by Doug Niagara.
This is Doug Nygren, Fisheries Division Director. First of all, I'm going to talk about our reference document. That's the document where we put special regulations that are different than the statewide regs. Talk about some of the things we're contemplating for calendar year 22. Currently at Tuttle Creek Reservoir, we've been operating with a 35-inch, 5 per day creel limit on blue catfish. And we are proposing to change to a 10-a-day creel limit with no more than one fish over 3 inches larger on blue catfish in 2022. This is kind of a celebration of the fact that the population has become well established. We feel we can liberalize some harvest now and still protect some of the bigger fish by limiting the number of large fish that anglers can take. Does anybody have any questions on that one? Okay, if not, I'll move on down. The next two have to do with recently implemented 21-inch link limits on walleye at Marion Reservoir and Cedar Reservoir. And we are proposing some changes in both of those locations based upon the population as it exists now. If you remember at Marion Reservoir, Craig Johnson, our biologist, presented a unique approach to walleye management that would have 2 years of protection with the 21-inch link limit, followed by a harvest period where we would lower the link limit to allow some harvest to occur. We would benefit from the delayed harvest during that 2-year period, and then have some periods of opportunity for people to take home smaller fish. So the proposal there would be in 22 to move to the harvest phase of the management scheme with an 18-inch minimum link limit, 3 fish a day creel limit, and only 1 per day 21 inches or larger on walleye at Marion Reservoir. Anybody have any questions about that approach? And I would also say that I intend to have Craig come and present at the workshop in June his assessment of how the fish responded to the link limit and what he would like to do moving forward. So you'll get a much more detailed view of this regulation in June. Same way with Cedar Bluff.
From time to time in the past, Marion was able to almost be self-sufficient with its own recruitment. Do we know whether this enhanced the recruitment of walleye, or did it just protect those that were there?
We have had a history of good natural reproduction there. The past 5 years or so, that has not been the case, and we've had to do some stocking to try to maintain that population. And I think Craig will be bringing some information to the June meeting about what he thinks is going on in terms of a return or not of natural reproduction and recruitment there in the face of the restriction that's been imposed to angling over this year and last year. So I can't really tell you at this point. I don't know if we can make that statement yet, but I think that he'll be prepared to give you plenty of details in June.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
Chairman Lobert, we've got 2 hands raised. Chad, I'm going to unmute you now.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes.
All right, very good. So, hey, my question is in regards to Cedar Bluff Reservoir, and I think I want to call it in that beginning portion of 2019, I believe, is when we started the 21-inch length limit there as far as Cedar Bluff. And I think our whole move there, as I went to that public meeting that was held in Waukene, the move, I believe, was to protect, if I'm not mistaken, that 2015 year class. And of course, and I fished the KWA and have fished Cedar Bluff quite a bit. And, last year we knew the health of the fish was poor. There was a lot of discussion, and I don't know if we had really a concrete answer as to what took place with the bait. There's some claims that some trouble with the shad, but I guess the big question on my mind is, number one, I think the density ratings that were posted for this year, I have some questions on the accuracy, I guess, of that, but I'd like to hear, and I guess maybe that June meeting is going to be the time to be able to voice those concerns and get a little bit more feedback on the state of the fishery as it stands right now.
This is Doug Nygren.
Yes.
Yeah, we will be able to provide you with some additional information, but we did have some forage issues. Although late last year, we did see an improvement in forage, and body condition of fish last fall really improved. That said, though, we are still looking at opening it up. I didn't get to that part of my presentation yet, but let me just tell everybody what we were proposing for Cedar Bluff, and then we can continue the discussion. We will maintain the 21-inch length limit in 22, but we're proposing a 5 per day creel limit, except 2 fish 15 to 18 inches may also be included in the creel. So we're going to liberalize it and allow some harvest of fish that are 15 to 18 inches, and still try to protect that big year class as it moves on through with the 21.
I think that's a good move, but I guess my concern is that it's a year too late. My feelings that 15-year class still exists as it once did. And of course, there's a tournament that's going on this weekend. You'll have some of the best walleye anglers in the state. And I think all but out of 40 some teams, all but on ours, it's a catch, record, release scenario. I think all but one team out of 40 some caught their 5 fish limit, which again was just recorded and released. And it's only over 15-inch fish. And I'll be very interested to see what that looks like this year, because we've got some tremendous anglers that have been on the lake, upwards of 15 times and have seen one walleye during that time frame. And so I'm obviously not a biologist. I'm just a fisherman that's out there and able to read graphs and understand the conditions. But I think the thing that you have proposed is outstanding. But I'm really curious whether or not, and again, I'm under the understanding that we're not doing any stocking. It's still just all natural recruitment for Cedar Bluff. Maybe I stand corrected on that, but my understanding is we've been kind of self-sustaining out there, and I'm wondering about what's happening on any of the other year classes that are coming up. So again, I've belabored it a little bit. I won't speak any further, and if June will be the time to come through and discuss some of that, then I'll if that's open to the public, I'll try to attend then.
Okay. There was another hand raised.
Yeah, this is Doug Storr from Hayes. Actually, my question related to Cedar Bluff Lake also, and Doug, I think you answered it with your further explanation. So I think I'm good. Thanks.
Any other questions for Doug? If not, carry on.
This is Commissioner Spohr. Doug, could you give us an update on what the biologists found this spring in either netting or what they're, or the walleye in the lake, I guess is my big question. Can you give us an update?
We spent quite a bit of time out there. We were taking walleye eggs at Cedar. We weren't originally planning to collect walleye eggs there. We were looking elsewhere, but we were struggling. And so we decided at the last minute to open up an effort at Cedar Bluff, and we did very well there. Obviously we're pretty good at catching them. So what we see during the spring spawning run on the areas that we run our nets may not be indicative of what anglers are catching, but there are certainly good numbers of large fish in there. And it turned the tide for us in terms of our walleye production season this year. Had we not gone to Cedar Bluff, we may not have met our goal. So it really performed well. And when Dave comes and gives his presentation in June, I'm sure he can give us an update exactly what we did there and what he is planning to do moving forward as far as the need for stocking as well as the regulation change. So I think he's prepared to come and give a very detailed report in June that will really make sure that you have everything you need to make an informed decision on the proposal.
Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Brad Lovelace. I'd just like to make a quick comment. We get very intelligent people call in asking and challenging us on our walleye management, and we obviously appreciate and benefit from that. I really want to give a pat on the back for Doug and his fishery folks. They put a lot of effort into their management plans, and what you see in these regulation proposals is a very dynamic approach to this. In the old days, it used to be black and white. Now these regulations are nuanced. They're fine tuning them. We've always paid attention to the biological science. We're getting better at paying attention to the social science as we plan these, because we want fishermen and women anglers to be satisfied. And so it becomes kind of a complex formula, but we do appreciate the input. I really want to thank Doug and his folks for their careful management of this, and they're making promises and keeping promises, and they're making adjustments, trying to listen carefully to what the anglers want, and also to interpret that in ways that the fishery can be sustainable and can get stronger over time. So just really appreciate the work in that. Thank you.
One thing I think I need to mention too, this is Doug Nygren again, that is that last year we were unable to collect walleye eggs. We made a decision in the face of COVID that we didn't know if we could collect eggs safely for our employees. And so last year we did not produce much at all in terms of a person. So we were really hopeful for a great egg take season this year. We exceeded our goals, and so we're hopeful to get back on track in our production. And for those that are interested in what we're doing, we are constructing right now a brand new walleye propagation building at the meat hatchery that'll be able to produce another 300,000 or 400,000 walleye fingerlings per year, and even some larger individuals up to 10 inches in length at that facility. Once it rolls out, we're hoping to be able to operate that next year. So while the ultimate goal would be to get to have natural reproduction and recruitment success and not have to stock, the stocking program still remains an important part because most of our lakes are not doing that currently.
Any other questions for Doug? Okay.
Okay, I'll move down the rest of the list. I think those are the ones that were the most controversial. We have some cities that came to us that were operating with their own fishing regulations, and they want us to take over the role of implementing regulations via our regulation program with our reference document as well as our statewide regs. The first one is Bartlett City Lake. They want to operate with a 15-inch minimum length limit, which is a statewide limit, but they would like a 5 per day creel limit on channel catfish there. Parsons West Pond is a similar situation. They've been operating under local regulations and they want to shift over to state regulations through our system. And they want to add a 15-inch minimum length limit and a 5 a day creel limit on channel catfish at that location. Bone Creek Reservoir currently has a slot length limit on largemouth bass, and it's 13 to 18 inches slot length limit, and they want to change that to an 18-inch minimum length limit and a 5 a day creel limit on saugeye. Currently, we're operating on a 2 a day, so we're proposing to liberalize the saugeye creel limit at Bone Creek. I'm going to go down through this whole list, and then we can go back and talk about any of these that you want to individually. Again, at Parsons, there's a local regulations that have been in effect there at Parsons Tolan Creek Pond. They want to operate with a 15-inch minimum length limit and a 5 a day creel limit on channel catfish. Wichita KDOT Lake, that is a lake that's owned by KDOT that we have open to the public, and we want to change to a 21-inch minimum length limit and 2 a day creel limit on saugeye in that location. Sedgwick County Lake Afton, we're proposing a change to a 21-inch minimum length limit on wipers. And Harvey County East Lake, we're proposing to change to an 18 length limit. It's been on largemouth bass. We've been operating on a slot link limit with a 13 to 18 a day creel limit. So we'd like to switch to an 18-inch minimum link limit. That population has not been holding up very well. We want to build it back up. And then finally, in the reference document, to be consistent with what we have on the wildlife side with youth mentor programs. Currently, our youth mentor ponds that we have across the state say that an adult, somebody over 18, can fish there only if they have a child under age 16 with them. So we're proposing to make this consistent with what we've done on the wildlife side and change ours from under 16 to under 18. And we'll be asking to do that in the reference document as well. Does anybody have any questions about any of those reference document items I just went over?
Okay. No questions? Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, so our next regulation change relates to our trout stocking locations at Colbyville High and Mined Land Wildlife Area and Sherman Smoky Gardens. We would like to change each of these from type 2 waters to type 1 waters. It's a good story out west in that we just renovated Colbyville High Pond in the town of Colby. I was out there the other day, went out there were fishermen everywhere, and the city was out working, doing some additional work on the lake. Walked up just to talk to a guy that was fishing, and it was the mayor of Colby that was out there catching trout. He had his 3-pole permit and was being successful, and he's just so excited about renovating that pond and getting it up and running. So we're excited to really get that one going again and creating that. So the type 1 waters are waters that anybody that's fishing there during the trout season has to have the trout permit. Currently, they're operating as type 2, meaning they could be fishing, if they're fishing for something else, they can be there during the trout season without a trout permit. We've determined that these lakes are primarily during the trout season. That's what most people are going after. There's limited opportunity for other species. And so we want to make sure people have their trout permit and support the program financially so that we can help pay for the cost of stocking trout. So another great story at Sherman County Smoky Gardens is that lake has been renovated. And it's also been restored by having water available from a pumping system that comes off of our expanded wildlife area to keep the lake full, working in concert with Sherman County Commission to get this lake up and running again. And they wanted to put it into the trout program. It had been in the trout program years ago, but the lake dried up and there really wasn't any opportunity. So we're going to get them back in it for next fall. Again, it would be switched. It was already in regs as the type 2 water. We're going to switch it into a type 1 as well. And the Mined Land Wildlife Area, this unit 30, which is a lake that traditionally has been a year-round trout fishery, but there's been some changes in the limnology down there, and we're switching it over to just be a November through April program like the other trout locations. We're not sure that we can get over summer survival of trout in that lake anymore. And we're going to be switching it over during that period of time to a type 1 as well, where anybody that's there during the trout season has to have the trout permit. And that's all I have on that issue, unless anybody has any questions.
Doug, this is Emmerich. I have a question. How do you determine, do you know what the trout survival rate is on trout lakes or ponds that you stock? I mean, I guess I'm asking if you had a bad batch of trout and they were delivered, they got into the lake and they just died off. I guess my second question is, do those fish sink?
Well, we have had situations where fish got stressed during hauling, and we've had some mortality associated with just post-release. And normally what happens what we do when that happens is we try to document the numbers that are lost. We contact our contractor because they're supposed to put them in the lake in good shape. And we ask them to bring additional fish to make up for the fish that were lost. Normally we have great survival. There are occasions where something goes wrong, an aerator breaks down, or the vehicle for some reason has a problem and the fish stay on the truck longer than what they were originally intended. And we do experience some mortality there, but it's up to the vendor to make good on that. There are a few situations where we're the ones stocking the fish. We do keep some fish at Mead as a backup and we also keep some trout at Milford in case we have a disruption in the supply from our commercial providers. And so in those cases, if we lost fish, it would just be on us, and it would be on us to see if we have additional resources to try to replace any that were supposed to be available to anglers but weren't because of some sort of a mortality associated with the movement and transport of those fish. So in the second part of your question, Eric Memrick, I missed that.
I just wanted to know how the mortality rate. How do rainbow trout? Do they, if they die in the lake or the pond, do they just sink, or those fish float? How do you determine that? The mortality rate.
Oftentimes we will see them floating at the boat ramps after a release. There will be some fish that will sink, but over time, as they start to decay, oftentimes they will surface, and a few days later they will be visible. So obviously, if there's a die, we aren't able to detect every single one that we lose and ask for a complete replacement. But if it's a major event, we do our best to make an estimate of what we think needs to be brought to make up for a problem.
Okay, Doug, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Doug on trout? Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, I think I'm going to pass off to Chris Steffen to talk about 115.17.2.
Yeah, this is Chris Steffen, the Aquatic Nuisance Species Coordinator. So 115.17.2 is commercial sale of fish bait. The current regulation gives a list of live fish and live crayfish that may be sold for bait in the state. It also includes one line about the ability to sell gizzard shad only if dead. The issue that's come up is there are some other species our bait shops would like to sell dead. And since the regulation's a little unclear on that, we're just proposing to add some language that includes those species that that would like to be sold dead, and then a little more language that hopefully captures any future species that they would like to sell dead as well.
Okay, any questions on that one? Well, hearing none, do we want to go then to the Great Fishing Derby? Or do we have more on commercial sale of fish bait?
Mr. Chairman, this is Doug Nygren. I think David Breath, he's on the road stocking fish around the state for the Great Kansas Fishing Derby. I saw him on a minute ago. I thought he was going to be able to jump on and give you an update.
I'm here.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
All right. I just got to find a stopping spot. All right. Well, thank you all for letting me talk about the Great Kansas Fishing Derby today. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I really just wanted to highlight the basics of the rules and the website, because that's how we're going to run the Derby. So Jason, if you'll allow me to share my screen, I'll show the website.
You should be able to share your screen, David. I made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay, great. Do you see the website?
Yes.
Awesome. So the website URL is ksfishderby.com. And that's where we're going to run everything out of. So if you catch a tagged fish, go to ksfishderby.com. If you want to know where you can catch one, go to ksfishderby.com. And if you want to sponsor, when we announce the locations tomorrow at noon, we're announcing all the locations at noon tomorrow on our Facebook, our KS Outdoors, our KWPT Facebook page, and our Fisheries Facebook page at noon tomorrow. If you're a sponsor near one of these locations and you want to sponsor fish, contact me through the website. But again, it starts May 1st, goes till July 31st. We're going to have over 30 lakes statewide, 500 tags out there. So hopefully we'll have 500 winners. And if you catch a tagged fish, you can either keep the fish or throw the fish back. It's up to you. And harvest regulations for that lake. But then you take the code and you go to claim your prize here on the website. And when you click on that, it pops up with a form. You enter your information, the tag information, where you caught it, what fish you caught, what the species was, where you caught it, the code for the tag, the date you caught it, the tag color, and submit all that information to me. And in about 5 days, I'll return with an email and a certificate saying, congratulations, here's your prize, and here's where to collect it. So it'll be at hopefully a local sponsor that was near that lake. If you catch one of our statewide prizes that were sponsored by Wildlife and Parks, Kansas Wildscape, or Bass Pro Cabela's Outdoor Fund, you might just receive the prize, the gift card via mail. I'll just mail it directly to you. Just showing you a little bit more about this website. It has some rules and information and who to contact, which is me if you have any more questions. We have our sponsors outlined here. So as we get more sponsors, we'll continue to update our logos that you can see who's sponsoring these fish. Frequently asked questions page. And then the big one that everyone's real excited about tomorrow is the participating locations. So once we highlight these at noon tomorrow, they'll all be listed on here. Is there any questions about the fishing derby? Again, it starts May 1st this Saturday.
Yeah, Commissioner Feller, what's the nature of the prizes that people can look for?
Yeah, so it could be, we always like gift cards because that way you don't know who's going to catch the prize, so you don't know exactly what prize they want. So I think almost all of our prizes right now are gift cards, anywhere between $20 to $100.
Okay.
So it's pretty substantial, and they could be fishing tackle retailers. We've had automotive stores donate. So if you need to get your oil changed someplace, they'll get you a gift card for that. We have a zoo that donated. We have a zoo that donated a family membership a year for a fish near their location. I did forget the register today. You do not have to register for this derby. When you're registering to win raffle prizes. So we know we're only going to have so many tags, which means we're going to have so many winners. But even if you don't catch a tag, if you just go to that register today and enter your information, you'll be entered automatically into raffles where you can just win for just signing up.
Have you got preliminary indications of interest?
From anglers, yeah, we've had a lot of people that have reached out to us saying, hey, you know, they want to know that if their local lake is already on the map. And we've also had lots of sponsors. I think once we share the locations, we're going to have a lot more sponsors want to get involved. So we're hoping that's the case.
Yeah. Well, a great idea. Interesting.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sill, do you have a variety of species involved that might get casual anglers as well as the pretty intense anglers to have a chance at catching a tagged fish?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, because that's what I forgot to bring up. Yeah, we're going to tag all species. So it's not just a derby. It's not just a bass derby. Anything that swims in the lake that's listed could be tagged. When we go out there and we tag these fish, we know, I'll be honest, we know there's going to be catfish. We know there's going to be bass. We're going to try to get crappie, some nice sized sunfish, some big reddy or some big bluegill. So that way anybody with a hook, weight, and bobber can win a prize. But we also are going to do some carp and drum. If we get one of those through our electrofishing or netting processes to get these fish that are already swimming around in those lakes, if we see those, we'll tag them too, because we know there's anglers out there that enjoy those fish.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Brad Lovelace. So David, you mentioned there'll be 30 lakes that will be on your list this year. And we're all anxious to see that list of lakes, of course. Is this kind of a set number that you'll always maintain, or what's your vision beyond this year in terms of lakes that you plan to work with?
Yeah, great question. So when we originally proposed this, I was just looking at, 10 or 15 lakes. I just wanted to kind of dip a toe in this and see how we were going to do. And as a division, we decided, well, let's expand it to 30. Let's try to do a really good effort to get as much of the state involved. Next year, if it grows to 60 or 70, maybe even more, that would be awesome. That's what we want to see. In Washington, where this is modeled off of, they use trout there because they raise trout in their hatchery and it's just easy for them to use. But they have over 100 lakes. And 1,000 tags. And they do that because it's extremely popular with the anglers. They have vendors knocking on their door because they want to sponsor and get involved. And their agency supports it. They're to their 6th year doing this. So next year, if we have a lot more time to plan, we have some success to build on, we can double that and move it to our bigger reservoirs. Right now, we're focusing on a lot of our smaller lakes because we want people to win. We want you to go out there and realize, there's 15 tags in a 100-acre lake, you might win. So,
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Any more questions for David? Well, thank you. It sounds exciting.
Thank you.
Matt, you want to talk about night coyote hunting? Are you unmuted, Matt?
Matt, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Brian. Oh, okay. There it went. I got you. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everybody see that? Okay. So we'll go ahead here. I'm talking about the night vision permit for coyote hunting. And I'm going to start out with some background information since we received quite a few public comments after the regulatory process had concluded. To start with, I want to say this is a subject that the department has received persistent public comment on for many years, as hunters have seen this going on TV and visiting with people in states around us and hunting in states around us. So there's been a lot of interest in this for a long time, and they've intermittently come to commission meetings as well. And the department had not acted, or those comments we had never really progressed with any action until the November 2019 commission meeting, when a couple members of the public showed up. And at the completion of their public comment, the commission asked the department to draw up a proposal to allow night hunting with the restrictions that we would put on it for the commission to vote on. And so over the next 4 meetings, we discussed the pros and cons of this type of hunting pretty extensively, I would say. And during that process, we actively sought public comment throughout, including taking the unusual step of workshopping the subject twice to give people a couple of extra months to comment. We also publicized this through social media, press releases on our website, and we directly invited public comment to landowner groups and federal land management agencies, with the recognition that this was a controversial subject that not everybody would be in support of. And so then in August of 2020, the commission did take a vote on it, and they approved the proposal that the department had provided. And I've provided some of the major considerations from my perspective that were taken into consideration. I want to mention this first one real quick. There was a recognition that there were several legislators that had an interest in this subject. And so sort of hanging over the process was the possibility that if the department and the commission didn't enact some type of restrictive season, there was a possibility that the legislature might enact a broadly legal state law that allowed this in a way that was much less palatable than what the department might have proposed. So I won't speculate as to how much of a how much of a factor this was in the commissioners' votes, but it was certainly a subject that was brought up a few times and that people recognized. And then I'll hit on each of these other subjects real quickly. As far as the legality of night hunting prior to the establishment of this permit, the night hunting of coyotes and fur bearers without night vision equipment is already legal. And so I wanted to be clear that this discussion was specifically about the use of lights, night vision, and thermal imaging equipment to hunt coyotes. It was not a question of whether or not hunting at night should be allowed. It's also noteworthy that that night vision equipment is already allowed under certain circumstances for some individuals, and specifically in cases of damage by state law, landowners could use this equipment. And then wildlife control permit holders could also currently use this equipment year round. And we estimated that 80 to 90 of our wildlife control permit holders got the permit specifically for the ability to hunt at night. And so we knew that this type of activity was already occurring on the landscape to some degree, and to our knowledge, without incident, without any negative consequences from it. So, and with the ability to use night vision for damage already, we generally considered that the major reason for providing this opportunity was to provide additional opportunity to people who had been requesting it. And so that was the major intent of the season. As far as the coyote population status, this is kind of an interesting thing. Everybody knows coyotes have been heavily pursued, persecuted, even suppressed for many decades. You know, back in the old days, people talk about the things that used to be allowed. Well, there were bounties on coyotes up until 1970, and then poisons like strychnine and cyanide were allowed up as recently as 1978 and 1983 were the laws that basically restricted and eliminated them. And then in the 1970s and 80s, this figure on the lower left shows the fur boom years. The fur trade became very lucrative at that time. And so following the end of the bounties and the end of the poisons, there was a high level of harvest pressure by trappers and hunters for coyotes and other fur bearers. And so up until, you might say that the pressure of the old days somewhat persisted until about 1990. And then at that time, again, looking at this figure on the lower left, the fur market crashed. In the early 90s, well, the CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, which is a large federal ag program that puts highly erodible cropland into native grass, that program became established, and it created an abundance of habitat that proved to be very beneficial to coyotes and deer and various other species. But that was probably very beneficial to coyotes. And then coyotes also became established in urban areas in the state about that time. So beginning in about 1990, I would say that we had somewhat of a population release. All those harvest pressures, or many of them, either disappeared or became much more lax. And so on the right there is our population index for coyote based on our annual roadside survey. And it shows that since about 1990, that index has increased 2 to 3-fold in the past several decades. And so, in fact, Kansas has the highest documented harvest of coyotes in the US according to the US Fur Bearer Harvest Statistics Database, and that was 2018 data. Now, I've got documented underlined there because some states like Texas would harvest a lot more coyotes than Kansas, but they don't keep track of harvest or monitor the populations in the manner that we do. So we have the highest documented harvest. California would be another state that would have the potential in terms of coyote numbers to harvest a lot more than us. But again, as far as documented, we're the highest. Whoops. At a larger scale, coyotes were historically a species of the prairie of the range and the deserts, and so they existed kind of in the middle of the through the mid parts of the country and down to the south. But with the removal of wolves and the establishment of agriculture, they began expanding their range. And in fact, in the last 20 to 30 years, they've filled up the far east and southeast parts of the country. And so with the range expansion they've undergone, as well as the population expansion in many of these other states, it's probably fair to say that coyotes are more abundant now than they've ever been in history. So as a species, they're doing very well. We also extensively considered the safety and association with illegal activities. And one of the major things we used to assess these two things was the status in other states. And the main, this figure was something we put together to compare the recommendations for Kansas versus the other states in Kansas, in the Midwest. And we also included Texas and Colorado in there as well. But the key takeaway here is that of 14 other states besides Kansas, 13 of them already allowed some form of night hunting activity for coyotes, with 9 of the 13 allowing lights, thermal imaging equipment, and night vision, which is what we had proposed. Only Oklahoma, of all these states, didn't already allow something like this. And so we did have an extensive group of states that we surveyed on a variety of subjects. And these states did not report any more legal or safety issues associated with this type of hunting than there was with any other type of hunting. In terms of the question of fair chase, I guess the way we posed this was, does the technology provide a significant advantage over a coyote's natural ability to detect danger? And some would argue that yes, it does. Others would argue no, that this is still difficult. And still others might say, well, this might be more effective, but it's no less sporting than other legal techniques that are allowed out there. So regardless which position you have relative to fair chase, I think it is pretty obvious that this is relatively subjective and debatable. The fair chase issue, people can argue different points of it, depending on their own perspective. However, this is somewhat measurable, and I'll come back to this with the actual data. We can look at the effectiveness of night hunters compared to other hunt techniques to see if it is shooting fish out of a barrel, so to speak. So I'll come back to that. But I also want to say another thing when it comes to fair chase. If this is extremely simple, you might expect coyotes to be impacted in some areas, but none of these other states that have allowed them reported population impacts on states. And some of them, like Nebraska and Texas, have allowed these techniques for decades. And so that might be, an indication that in fact, it's not as easy as what you might perceive it to be. So again, the department or the commission approved the regulation as proposed, and the restrictions that we had proposed were that the regulation would allow the night hunting the use of night vision equipment for coyotes only. Rather, there was discussion of it being allowed on fur bearers as well, or at least some fur bearers. It was restricted to the season dates of January 1 through March 31, rather than statewide, which the current coyote season is in Kansas. And this is the case in other states as well. We prohibited it from vehicles, which it is allowed from in some states. And then we also were interested, we really only wanted to allow this on private lands. So within our regulations, the way we could do that was to say that it's not allowed on KDWP&T managed lands. And so, and then we also required the permit so that we could track the use of, or the participation in the event and what the success rates were. And so we just finished our season not too long ago at the end of March there, and we sold a total of 5,776 permits. And this is the number I pulled off of from our data. This might wind up changing a few permits here and there when we get the official results, but this is what I pulled. And then to give you an idea of what this number means, in the 2019 small game harvest survey, which is where we get our a lot of our coyote hunting information. Coyote hunters are not required to have a fur harvester permit. They hunt with a hunting license. And so we use the small game harvest survey in order to survey them. But they estimated a total of 33,407 hunters, and that is 17%, or the total number of night vision permits was 17% of the total coyote hunters. We surveyed 1,000 of these individuals, and we got 470 responses, which is a very good 48% response rate, and then extrapolated these results to the population, or to all permit holders, I mean, to come up with our estimates. And so here is the total number of permits. Of these individuals, 87% of them hunted coyotes and 74% hunted at night. This seems odd that people would buy a permit and not use it, but this is fairly standard with all of our permit types, that people get them with the intent and then don't make it out. So those are the percentages that actually participated in the activity. They harvested an average of 7.6 coyotes per hunter, including 4.4 coyotes at night and 3.2 during the day, which was an average of 0.7 coyotes per calendar day for the night hunters, and 0.5 coyotes per day for the daytime hunters. And then that equates to a total of 18,801 coyotes taken at night and 16,202 taken during the day by these hunters up here who we surveyed. To give you an idea of the context here, those numbers might not mean so much by themselves. We can compare the night vision permit activities along with those of traditional hunters, which in the small game harvest survey, that would include all legal coyote hunting techniques prior to the night vision permit. And then also we can compare them to trappers from the 2019 fur bear harvest survey. And I point out that these are both 2019-20 season. The current season's data isn't available yet for either of these. And so I used last year's data to make this comparison. But starting with the average coyote harvest per day, the night hunters average 0.7. The traditional hunters from the small game harvest survey average 0.53, and trappers average 0.8 coyotes per day. If you look at the average coyotes per hunter, the night vision permit holders average 7.6, but 4.4 of those were during the night, or using the night vision equipment, I should say, compared to 4.2 by the traditional hunters. So those two things are very comparable, obviously. And then trappers average 18.1 coyotes per trapper. And then, of course, there are different numbers here. There's only a couple different numbers of users. There's only a couple thousand trappers. There is, there was the 4,000 and some night hunters, and then the traditional hunters were over 33,000. So if you apply those to the averages, your total coyote harvest then was 18,801 for the night vision permit, or I'm sorry, for the night hunters, not just the night vision permit, but that was the night harvest. And then 141,000 plus for the traditional hunters, and the trappers harvested 37,000 plus. And so basically trappers harvested twice as many as the night hunters, and traditional hunters harvested about 8 times as many. However, night hunting was not totally additive to traditional hunting. We asked the hunters, of course, hunters have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of territory that they hunt. And so it's logical that if they spend more time hunting in the night, they might spend less time hunting in the day. And so when we asked them that question, that was in fact the case. So 25% of respondents indicated they hunted a lot less during the day, and another 19% said they hunted a little less during the day. And so if you consider the fact that if they might have averaged 4.2 coyotes during the day, which is what the 2019 hunters average, you might estimate then that their actual net harvest in nighttime hunting was 3.4 plus 3.4 coyotes per hunter, or a little over 14,000 might have been the total net harvest of coyotes that resulted from allowing this technique. And that was less than 10% of the total 2019 harvest. As far as safety and legal considerations, law enforcement surveyed their employees after the season, and they reported no incidents associated with the night hunting season. There was also no indication of increased hunt harvest or increase in percent harvested by night vision permit holders for pelt tag species. And to explain that just a little bit, if night vision hunters would have been going out and say shooting a whole bunch of bobcats, then, and the bobcats and swift fox are our pelt tag species, then the percentage of bobcats taken by hunting would have increased in our pelt survey data. And that was not the case. So there was no indication with either bobcat or swift fox of additional hunter harvest related to this permit. We also surveyed respondents, and 96% of them indicated that they had no concerns about target identification when we were out there. Of those who did, the major comment they made was that they had difficulty or they had some concern that they or others might be able to differentiate domestic dogs and coyotes. And I did receive a comment or two on that. However, I'm not aware of any cases where that actually occurred. That, you know, we didn't hear about any specific cases with certainty that that happened. And then we also asked them about their feelings towards human safety, and 3% of them indicated they had some concern. At least one of the comments was, yes, I'm always concerned about human safety when I'm hunting. So maybe that one could have been phrased a little bit differently, but by and large, the hunters did feel it was safe and selective, I guess, when they were in the field. As far as fair chase goes, again, I mentioned earlier, we can look specifically at the data. If you want to extrapolate this out to 10 days of hunting, which is more than what most hunters hunted on average, the night hunter would have killed 7 coyotes at night. The traditional hunters would have killed 5.3 over 10 days, and the trapper would have killed 8. And so I know that's easy math, but that's just perhaps a way to look at things, that for most trappers, the difference in night hunting versus day hunting is going to be less than 2 coyotes difference. Now, the night hunters could also have hunted in the day some too, but in future years, as we make this comparison, that total would be over here in the traditional hunting activities. And then if we look at average coyotes per hunter, the night season or night vision permit night hunting and the traditional hunters killed about the same number of coyotes, although the night vision permit holders were limited to 3 months, whereas these hunters had the potential to hunt year round, although most of them hunt during the fall and winter during the traditional harvest seasons. And then both of these techniques amounted to about 1/4 of the total trapping harvest. So I would say, as far as these numbers go, that nothing jumps out here and says that this technique is walk out there and shoot a bunch of coyotes. They're not averaging, you know, 2 or 3 times as many coyotes using this technique as what traditional hunters are. There is another way you can look at this, and this is the range of harvest levels per hunter. And this is pretty interesting. The range is of course from 0, but it goes up to 106 with one getting 90 also. And so those numbers seem pretty high. 80% of the permit holders harvested fewer than 5 coyotes, and 91% of them harvested 10 or less coyotes. So the vast majority are over here in a relatively low harvest, less than what 91% of them average, well less than what the average trapper harvests. 20% of these of those surveyed did say that they harvested a lot more coyotes than they would have without this permit, this opportunity, this equipment. So it did prove beneficial to some. Now, it's easy to look at this at these down here and say, well, somebody's pretty good at this. And that is true. Whenever we have an unlimited harvest season like this, you always wind up with some people who this is their primary pastime. This is the major outdoor activity in which they participate. So they work really hard at it. They spend a lot of time at it. Maybe they've got some really good areas that they've worked for a long time to establish, or perhaps they're hunting at a couple of feedlots where there's a lot of coyotes, stuff like that. But we see this same thing when we look at other harvest types. And so here's traditional hunting harvest from the 2019 fur bearer harvest survey. And it's interesting how almost identical the pattern of harvest here. And in that survey, we picked up 5 individuals who harvested over 100 coyotes, including 1 who harvested 200 coyotes. So that was traditional equipment from last year. So again, the pattern here is identical. And so the night hunt, what we found in the night hunting pattern is not unique. And you'd see this with trapping and across different species too, not just different, not just hunt types. So I'm going to kind of wrap this up with about 5 just general information slides of other data that we collected in the survey. One of them is what type of visual equipment did they use? Over a quarter of the individuals used more than one type of visual equipment, but lights were the most popular, with over half of the participants using lights at some point. Centerfire rifle was by far the most popular weapon type or harvest equipment. And then the number of coyotes harvested each month, over half of them were harvested in January. And if you apply the slope right here to the February harvest, you could say that over 70% of the harvest would have occurred within what the current fur bearer harvest season is. So most of this was pretty consistent with when fur bearers are currently being harvested. As for why they hunted, the importance of the reasons for hunting, I told you that sort of my perspective was, since there was damage opportunity available to landowners and wildlife control permit holders, that recreational opportunity, or because they like to hunt, or just additional opportunity, depending on however you want to look at it, would be the most important. But actually, to reduce coyote predation on livestock or coyote predation on wildlife were the 2 most common reasons for people going out there. And it is true and obvious from this that there are a lot of people out there on the rural landscape that feel that there are a lot of coyotes, and they would not mind seeing a few less of them in some cases. And so I did also specifically ask them, did you hunt at the request of a livestock owner specifically for predator control? And 58% of the respondents said that they did. So there has been some discussion about the effectiveness of preventative or general population control. And it is true that this is variably effective, but targeted removal, so at the direction of perhaps of a livestock producer who has lost a calf, is effective, where you're trying to remove a specific coyote or pair of coyotes. It usually is the case, involved in depredation, is the most effective and usually the preferred method of solving those problems in rural areas. And so I'll wrap this up. This will be the last slide. So there are 3 principles of sustainable harvest in wildlife management programs that were, these are pretty widely understood, I think, but this was in White et al., Trapping and Fur Bearer Management in North America. And these 3 things are that the species is not imperiled, that the harvest method is acceptable, and that the harvest of the species achieves a functional objective. And so on the first one, coyote status is certainly secure. The additional harvest isn't going to change that. And this harvest is sustainable, what occurred under this permit for at least this first year. And so the role of the coyote in the ecosystem is not jeopardized by this. And I'll remind everyone that the department does have a conservation objective, and we do care about the conservation of coyotes, and we will continue to monitor both the population and the harvest level of coyotes to make sure that they do, that their status does remain secure. On the third, I'll skip to the third one of these. Is there a functional objective to harvest or to this technique? And I would say, is there a functional objective to coyote harvest in general? And the answer to that is yes. It provides a lot of benefits to society. People harvest coyotes for fur, for income, for damage control of a variety of things, including pets and poultry and crops. It's not just livestock. And then this is also an important outdoor opportunity for a lot of people. And you could call this recreational, but that is insufficient. It doesn't adequately describe the importance to hunting to a lot of people in rural communities. And that's evidenced by the fact that there were over 30,000 coyote hunters in the state last year, and they spent over 300,000 user days in the field in pursuit of coyotes. So this is another, I think the answer there is obvious, that there is a functional objective to coyote harvest. The last one is the harvest method acceptable. And, you know, that was really the big question throughout this process, I think. We didn't identify any major legal or safety concerns, and none of them materialized after this first season. And I would also say, relative to fair chase, that the concerns aren't apparent from the data that we've collected. And so, I mean, I think we went into this with a very open mind as far as letting the data lead us where it would, and it just doesn't appear to be significantly different than other types of current harvest activities. And I would say that the perception of what this night hunting is may be a little bit different than what the reality of it is in some cases. Though, and I think as I've talked to some of these people who have done this, I get the impression that the major difference is what people perceive and what's the reality out there on the ground is just because you can see a coyote doesn't mean you're going to be effective at killing it. And so you still have to call them within range. As some of the people mentioned, you have to make a positive identification on the animal. And anyway, that would be the conclusions that we can come up with from looking at the data and reading the comments in the survey and whatnot up to this point. So with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That's an excellent report. You put in a lot of time and effort on this subject, and I, for one, very much appreciate it. Is there any questions for Matt by anybody on the commission? Yeah, Gary.
Mr. Chairman, I too want to commend Matt. That was a very, very good presentation. I was a very staunch supporter of that. And you always, in the back of your mind, do have a little bit of a shady area and a question if that really is the right way to go. And I tell you what, that is a very good presentation and put together well by facts and figures. So Matt, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Lauren.
As one who had some reservations, I too, Matt, that was an excellent presentation and I really appreciated it. I do have one question, and I never thought about this before, but did the trappers mind the night hunters being out there? Did you get any comments along that line?
When I surveyed fur harvesters about their support for this about a year or two ago, I'd have to go back and look at the specific data, but they were overwhelmingly supportive. Of course, trappers and hunters are not mutually exclusive because a lot of the trappers are hunters too. But so as a population or as a group, they were supportive. I have received comments from people who are both trappers as well as other hunters who do not support this for many of the reasons that we discussed during the process. They just don't think people need to be out there at night shooting coyotes. You know, there's a variety of reasonable responses to this that lead people to not support it. So I certainly wouldn't imply that all trappers are supportive of it, but as a whole, they generally were.
Commissioner Sill, but no conflicts between any of those, because I could see where there could be some slight potential, but thanks, Matt. And again, nice job. I appreciate your presentation today very much.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Gefeller, Matt, I've got a question. That those permit holders that chose to hunt at night, would they likely also be trappers in most cases? You said many were. Were these people that are used to being out there at night anyway?
Well, I didn't ask them if they were trappers or what other activities they participated in. Again, I could probably go back to that harvest survey from a year or two ago and maybe tease some of that data out of there. I'm sure some of them were, but I don't know how many.
How about new hunters? Did it attract anybody new, or are they mostly people who've already hunted coyotes that chose to hunt at night?
I would assume that this is mostly experienced coyote hunters because of the need for additional equipment that it takes, particularly if they get beyond lights. It's a pretty good investment. So it's probably not a first-time coyote hunter that was going to go out and get this equipment. Now, if they already had it, that might be another story, but I did not ask them in the survey. I tried to keep it short because I wanted a high response rate, and we were also on a short timeline to get the data collected before this meeting. So yeah, I can expand on that in the future if needed, I guess, if we continue down this path.
All right, thank you. Good report.
Emmerich.
Yeah, Matt, that was an excellent report, and I really appreciate that. You spoke about the other states and their experiences up to the same point. As a follow-up, did any of those other states have come to any other conclusions or any anomalies compared to what you found and just reported there? Any other unique circumstances or situations?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there have been a couple of negative incidents over the country with night hunting, but like I said, during the process before this was voted on, there are occasional incidents, but that's not different than other types of hunting. Occasionally somebody gets shot when they're pheasant hunting, but luckily those types of events have been extremely rare. And as people all across the country to some degree have been surveyed on this, because this is an issue. Some of you may have seen that recently several states in the east or southeast have legalized this as well. This has been a nationwide issue, and so all of us states that didn't have it and we're talking about it have been surveying and visiting with all of our counterparts in those states that do. And the overwhelming consensus, as I stated, is that this type of hunting has generally just been absorbed into the other types of hunting, and the net impact on coyotes is not noticeable or not detected by the monitoring techniques that the states use to monitor coyotes. So.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Are there any other questions for
Yeah.
Matt?
Good feller again. One more question, Matt. One of the concerns I had when we talked about this was strain on law enforcement and already stressed. Did we have any additional call outs, or did we see anything in that regard?
I asked Colonel Kaiser and he surveyed his people, and so I'll let him jump in and say more if he wants to, but he indicated to me that they had no specific incidents to report. So that's what I know, and if Colonel Kaiser would like to add to it, I would turn it over to him.
He's muted.
Sorry about that, Greg. Go ahead and unmute yourself again.
There you go. We polled the division. We had no reports during the special season of any incidents.
What about call outs that, suspected poachers that turned out to be coyote hunters, anything like that?
We didn't have anything that was reported back to us.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions for Matt or for Colonel Kaiser or anybody? Any questions from the public? I see I have one hand up. Elaine?
Hi, this is Elaine Giesel. I'm with Kansas Sierra Club. Thank you to Matt for a good report. I did have one point that the permit required was determined to be $2.50, I think, for the permit, and that was based on equity issues, as I recall from reading the minutes. I wonder though, since your data indicate that folks were using more than just lights, at least what, 50%, it's kind of hard to see your graphs on my computer, but if there are folks using more expensive scopes and so on, the question is are you able to sustain this economically at $2.50 a permit? I mean, just administering the permit's got to cost more than that. And given that most people didn't go out with a headlamp or a flashlight, would you consider at least raising the permit fee to help with your financial budget issues? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. The only reason we charged a fee for the permit is because this is the procedure that we could use to track these people for the survey and to get good harvest information. I think that the cost of administering this activity would be absorbed into all the other cost of the hunting license eventually if we didn't have the permits. So I don't know how long we would want to keep the permit with its main intent being just to track these people and to monitor the harvest. So I hope I was clear on that.
No, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Matt? Well, thank you very much. I think we now go to Stuart on waterfowl hunting on Kansas public lands.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. So I was tasked with providing some information today regarding discussions from the last meeting as it relates to public lands, public wetlands in specific in Kansas, and the potential overcrowding issues and some other comments that we received from this past waterfowl season. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, or try to anyway. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
full screen? I hope that's full screen.
We're actually seeing the other monitor, Stuart.
The split
the
one?
one with the one with the notes and everything on it.
How do I get rid of that?
Unshare your screen and then share it back.
Did that work?
Go ahead and unshare your screen, and then start your PowerPoint. Go ahead and just start your PowerPoint, Stuart, and we'll see what happens this time. There you go. And then start your PowerPoint and then share your screen, and then you'll be able to choose the full screen version.
Well, I don't see the share screen option now.
Go back over to where the faces are, videos are, and scroll over it, and it'll be at either the top or the bottom.
Sorry, folks, I'm IT illiterate.
I'm a founding director of that club.
I'm not seeing it, Jason. What am I supposed to be looking for?
You should be seeing on the page that had the video, it has all our videos on it. You should be seeing if you scroll over it, you should be seeing in the middle of the top or the middle of the bottom share screen where it's got the whole toolbar.
This one? I have assistants present. Oh, everybody's coming to help me now. Oh, your screen got minimized. There you go. Now open your PowerPoint. Is it this one? Yeah. Display it.
And start.
All right. What are these? And then minimize it. There we go. See if that works. Did that work?
That is good.
Okay. Thank you. Hey, Jake, can you shut my door, please? All right, let's see if we can get this started. I'm sure my staff is having a good chuckle over this one. So a couple weeks ago, I held a Zoom meeting with some wetland managers to get their perspective on these issues that were brought up at the last meeting. Well, good grief. Okay. So while we have wetland pools and properties all across the state, I chose to focus on just a handful of them that predominantly get hunted and are known widely as the wetland marshes that a lot of people hunt, specifically before freeze up occurs. And I also wanted to utilize properties that have been in the iSportsman program for quite some time, where I knew we had some significant data that could be utilized. And so these are predominantly waterfowl management focus areas. And the 6 wetland areas that I chose were Meridazine, Neosho, Slate Creek Wetlands, McPherson Valley Wetlands, Jamestown, and Cheyenne Bottoms. And the managers and the staff that manage these properties are on the Zoom meeting today. And I appreciate them taking the time to be on the meeting today, as well as assist me in this presentation. So if anybody has any specific questions for them, we can sure put them in the spotlight and let them try to answer your questions. So I had some specific things that we were looking for that I tasked these managers with. And the things that we were looking at were resident versus non-resident data and certain trends related to residents and non-residents, as well as historical data through the regular fall duck season. Were they having issues or problems on their specific properties? And what were those problems? And if they did have problems, what were their recommendations? So just kind of an idea of where these properties are located here in the state as it relates to the Central Flyway when we talk about waterfowl migration routes. So as you can see, I also tried to pick locations that were kind of spread out and varied in size from small, medium to large, and somewhat mild visitation to high visitation on these properties. So let's start off with Meridazine in the east there. 2,000 acres of wetlands, 14 wetland units, 420 acres of refuge. Jacob Coulter is the manager out there. We currently are going to be interviewing for an assistant manager to help Jacob out there. As you can see on the map, it's right along the Missouri border. So one of the main things I wanted to point out today was the historical trends. And these at the top here, the hunter trips and harvest 1963 through 2020. If you'll notice, the hunt trips are in orange. Duck harvest, I'm not so much concerned about for today's discussion, but I want to highlight that in the 2020 season, we were close to the 6,000, excuse me, for the hunt trips, we were just over the 4,000, 4,200 range, less than the 2011 season, 99, 97. And if you go clear back to 1970, we were approaching 8,000. So in relation to 2020, we were not any higher than some historic years for hunt trips. And then if you look at some of the percentages down here, resident versus non-resident in blue and orange here, we really didn't feel like there was a non-resident overpressure issue there at Meridazine. And one of the things that we found interesting was the demographics of our duck hunters and where they were coming from. And so this graph here on the bottom right, obviously most of them are Kansas residents. Missouri came in second there, but it makes a lot of sense being right next to the border there. Jacob views a lot of his Missouri hunters as kind of like residents. They make a lot of day trips to Meridazine, and so he welcomes them and feels like they're an integral part of the hunting culture there at Meridazine. And then on the right-hand column, you can see the average trips per hunter. And so Missouri was just a little bit higher than Kansas. Then jumping over to Neosho Wildlife Area, 3,243 acre wetland complex with 18 wetland pools and almost 588 acre refuge. Monty Manbeck and Travis Ratliff are the staff out there. So on this graph, we're looking at some of the same things. I've got to move my, again, resident trips are in blue, non-resident are in orange, and then the gray line above that are total hunters. And if you look at the 2021 season, we're about 3,600. But if you go back to 11 and 12 and even 10, this era, and back into 04, 05, quite a bit less than historical numbers for overall hunters. And this, this gray line includes all hunters. And you can see they've indicated some reasons why the declines in here, season dates pushed back and renovation years. But again, the 2021 season did not equal some prior historical seasons for overall hunters at Neosho. And then this is hunters and birds harvested by year. To move my, again, the hunters are in blue and the birds are in the orange. And I'm not so much concerned about the harvest, but again, the historical trends, 2021 compared to years like 04, 05 and even 99, 2000 are still higher than the 2021 season was at Neosho. But I will say at Neosho, this was the first year that the percent of non-residents did exceed the percent of resident hunters, 51% compared to 49% respectively. And again, demographics for Neosho, kind of the same message. A lot of Missouri folks, starting to see some folks from further out, Southeast, South Carolina, you'll see pop up on a lot of these locations, Texas, North Carolina, Louisiana, the ones you might expect. So jumping to Slate Creek, this is one of our smaller wetlands, but it is managed solely for moist soil management, waterfowl hunting down there along the Cowley and Sumner counties lines. 243 acres total, 7 pools. Kurt Grimm's the manager down there. A lot of people don't necessarily know about it, but it is kind of a unique little spot in south central Kansas. Again, we're seeing kind of the same thing there at Slate Creek. Doesn't get a lot of use. Our resident hunters maintained numbers anywhere from 300 to 400 since 2014, and really not much of a non-resident component there at all. Less than 20 hunters, other than 2015 from 2014 through 2020. And again, historical data from 2004 through 2021. This is the regular fall duck season. It includes residents and non-residents. The 2021 season, about 450 hunters total, where 14 and 15, 13, 14, all had higher numbers for total hunters than 2021 did. And again, demographics, as you might expect, Oklahoma, Texas, the close ones, and very, very minute compared to the other properties that we've discussed so far. On up to McPherson Valley Wetlands, they're in south central Kansas, the center part of the state. 2,074 wetland acres, 55 wetland units, a total of 425 refuge acres. And Jason Black is the manager for McPherson Valley Wetlands. He again felt like there really wasn't a non-resident overpressure issue there. And as you can see on the right here, the percent of residents versus non-residents from 16 through 20. less than 10% non-residents through those years. Hunter trips and harvest 16 through 20, kind of the same trends. But again, he didn't really feel like he necessarily had a non-resident overpressure issue. He felt like maybe he had his local traditional duck hunters there felt like they might have been run out by bigger city folks or folks coming from within the state, from other parts of the state, maybe crowding out the local traditional hunters there. Again, the demographics there at McPherson Valley Wetlands, they kind of flip-flop, but again, the South Carolina aspect is there. Arkansas, the states that we've seen at our other wetlands, which is indicative and makes you have the assumption that when they come to Kansas, they're not just hitting one property and then going back home. They're going to spend time here, and they're going to go to several of our wetlands. Headed up north central now to Jamestown, a little over 2,300 wetland acres, 10 wetland pools, right at 700 refuge acres. Rob Unruh and Matt Farmer are the staff up there. This is a resident, non-resident graphic again too, 2014 through 2020. As you can see, the non-residents are in orange, again, residents in blue. We still have a higher resident component there than non-resident. And that's, if you compare the 2020 numbers compared to 2016, not even close. And the use trends, the days versus harvest, 2014 through 2020, we did see a spike here in the total harvest, obviously, but conditions were great, habitat was great, and one of the highest 100 days on record as well. A lot of their constituents come out of Colorado and Nebraska, obviously, being that close to the Nebraska line. Even though this doesn't necessarily indicate it, I should reference that a lot of their normal average overall hunting crowd for all seasons comes from Nebraska. But again, this shows that waterfowl hunters from all over the country are willing to travel quite some distances. And when they're here, they're going to hit as many of the wetland properties as they can. And we'll end up at the big one, Cheyenne Bottoms. 12,862 acres of wetlands, 11 pools when they're all full, a little over 8,100 huntable acres, and then 4,761 refuge acres. And Jason Black is our manager out there. So here again, Cheyenne Bottoms was the other property where we saw non-resident use surpass resident use in 2020, 51% compared to 49%. But again, if you look at total numbers from previous years, it still didn't quite match up to 2013. We had 55,625 total hunters at the bottoms this year, whereas in 2013, we had a little over 6,000. And this was 97 through 2020. And again, similar to Merit-Zine, if you go back in historical records, not that we have 100% confidence in it, but there were, in the 60s and 70s, 8 to 10,000 hunter days, in the fall seasons wasn't uncommon. So if you look at the historical perspective, where 2020 was the highest next to 2013 from the 97 to 2020 period. But if you look back decades ago, it still doesn't surpass that. And keep in mind too, that's back in the day where we didn't have near the wetland acres available that we do currently. So we were seeing higher numbers back then with less places to hunt, less acreage to hunt. And again, the demographics for the bottoms, Kansas outweighed everybody else, same states, Missouri, Louisiana, Texas, South Carolina. So it's just kind of an interesting perspective. Pennsylvania, interesting perspective on how far Florida these folks are willing to drive. So again, why rise the trend we're seeing at some of these properties like Neosho and the bottoms and other places where we're starting to see that gradual trend upward. Again, the pandemic factors, I believe, were related to a lot of them in this past 2021 season. It wasn't just a Kansas issue, it was a national issue. Folks working remotely, they They could connect to Wi-Fi or hotspots on a computer in a parking lot or from a blind and continue hunting. You know, and when non-residents are here, they're going to spend their days here and weeks here and spend the time. The demographics from what I just showed kind of indicate that. Waterfowl hunting in general has just become a more popular activity. It's trending right now. Great marketing schemes that are really bringing a lot of new hunters into the waterfowl hunting aspect. A lot of videos on YouTube. Everybody's posting videos of their waterfowl hunts and duck hunts on YouTube, and that's getting a lot of attention and bringing more folks into the sport. Kansas probably does have less restrictions than other states. We don't have the lottery draws. We don't have specific days or time frames where they have to hunt or can hunt, and so they feel like they can come to Kansas and just hunt. Other than maybe check in or check out from iSportsman, that's really the main restrictions we have. But the wetland restoration development enhancement that we've done over the past decade, I think is a huge factor in that alone too. The old adage, you build it and they will come. If you look back over the past 10 years, just in the NACA grants, the North American Wetland Conservation Act grants that we've undertaken with the help of Ducks Unlimited, we're talking about almost 110,000 acres, mainly public property, but some on private land too that we've helped restore, develop, or enhance. And in our own Pittman-Robertson Wildlife and Parks Wetland Restoration Grant, we've done some really good work on over 2,000 plus acres. So we've built some really state-of-the-art wetlands and have provided some really good habitat. People know about it and they're coming. And they came. So what recommendations came from talking to the managers at Jamestown, Meredithine, and Slate Creek? They don't really feel like there was too many issues that warranted change currently. Neosho, one of the main things that we're recommending, that I'll talk about with the reference document coming up, is no access into the wetland before 5 a.m. and must exit the wetland within an hour after sunset, meaning you can't step foot into the water or launch a vessel into the water itself prior to 5 a.m. and you have to be out of the water within an hour after sunset. And the reason for this is to give waterfowl a greater rest period for roosting, feeding, and just overall less disturbance. Monty and Travis were reporting that, folks were launching and walking out there at 1 and 2 a.m. in the morning. And when a lot of folks do that, it does not, harassing and hazing waterfowl off the property and not giving those birds a chance to rest. And ultimately, by implementing this, it will give the waterfowl a chance to loaf and rest and be on the property when that 5 a.m. and legal shooting hours does occur. And actually, I would suspect that harvest would be more successful as well. One thing I want to make clear here is stepping foot into the water at 5 a.m. Walk-in hunters can walk down dikes and be ready at their spot to walk into the water at 5 a.m. They don't all have to congregate at a boat ramp or parking lot. So the walk-in hunters may actually have a little bit of an advantage of getting to the spot than the folks utilizing motorized or non-motorized vessels. At McPherson Valley Wetlands, motorized boats prohibited in all pools, all units is what we're recommending. We really haven't had any issues with vessels at McPherson Valley Wetlands. The pools units really don't lend themselves for the use of vessels. It is more of a walk-in type wetland. So we want to go ahead and set that into regulation this year to make that the motorized boats are prohibited. One of the other things we're planning to do there at McPherson Wetlands is designate the Big Basin unit as youth only during the youth and military season. Tried to be proactive in this stance, and some of the comments that we'd received from that youth and military season about no place for youth to hunt since military and veterans were allowed to hunt this past season. So in a measure to be proactive, we're going to delineate Big Basin unit as youth only for this upcoming season. And then that might even help with overflow youth at Cheyenne Bottoms. So then at Cheyenne Bottoms, there's several regulations that we're looking to change there. The first one being all motorized vessels operated at no wake speeds. and that's in all applicable pools. Basically, there's going to be some pools where no motorized vessels, like below you see pool 3A, we're recommending no motorized vessels. But in the entire complex and all applicable pools, that's tough to say 3 times, we're requesting no wake speeds. And then the no motorized vessels, like I said, in pool 3A, again, we're talking about waterfowl disturbance, hunter disturbance, all that we're trying to address here, and public safety issues. Number 3, no motorized vessels after 1:00 p.m. in pool 4A. You can still paddle in with a vessel or walk into pool 4A after 1 p.m. and hunt it. It's just no motorized vessels. And again, that's to give the waterfowl a rest, try to keep them around the wetland complex a little longer, and hopefully increase harvest success. Staff has already talked to the Barton County Attorney for supportive enforcement of these above regulations, as well as KSA 32-1125, which addresses reckless operation of vessels on department waters. We had some complaints, quite a few complaints of reckless operation of boats at Cheyenne Bottoms this past year and the past couple of years. Incidents of other hunters almost being run over by motorized boats, going up on dikes and islands and hitting hidden objects in the marsh. So from a public safety standpoint, those are the regulations that we're really looking at. But some of the non-motorized vessels in pool 3, or no motorized vessels in 3A and no motorized vessels in pool 4A after 1 p.m. That's designed, and we're hopeful that will keep the waterfowl around longer, less harassment, and give them a period of rest. And you'll notice I have guiding in parentheses behind the state statute there. We're still fully aware that there is some level of illegal guiding going on at the bottoms. I've already had conversations with the law enforcement division. We've talked with the Barton County Attorney, and they're in full support of enforcing that and seeking prosecution for that. So that's something we're going to target specifically too in the upcoming seasons. And I will say that the Barton County Attorney has taken this seriously enough that he will be riding around with Public Lands Regional Supervisor Manuel Torres coming up in a couple weeks out there, because he's taken this seriously and has taken an interest in the bottoms, and we appreciate his support. Some of the other things we're going to do are planning to designate pool 4B as youth only during the youth military season, to follow suit with what we're doing at McPherson Wetlands, to try to combat some of the issues that we saw last year with maybe some youth not having a place because of the new season. Pool 5's already been utilized as a youth mentored special hunt area, so we want to maintain that as well. Moving forward, where do we go from here? So basically the discussion continues. I didn't really talk about issues at federal reservoirs today. I wanted to take this in different phases. And like I said at the beginning, I wanted to focus on our state-owned and specific waterfowl managed properties with the 6 that we highlighted. We've heard some comments coming from the federal reservoirs, and I see that issue that we're going to discuss is kind of twofold. Whether you're talking about are there issues on the actual reservoir body itself versus adjacent wetland pools that we manage associated with that reservoir body. Some of the problems that we do have are data gaps with these properties, where most of the data that we do have, if they're not an ice sportsman, most of them are in the Northeast, have some of those capabilities, but historic data might have just been windshield cards or managers while out patrolling, just writing down data as we go. So that'll continue in the discussions on the federal reservoir level. Continue to look at specific regulatory changes per wetland, whether that be per property or is it something that we need to implement on a statewide basis. Looking at some access restrictions at the bottom, similar to what we're requesting and recommending at Neosho with the 5 a.m. time period, whether that be 5 a.m. or 4 a.m., we're not sure. McPherson Wetlands, we're already having that conversation too, or should that just be a regulation that is statewide regulation for all of our wetlands? Refuges in time, all of our managers talk about that, whether it be for waterfowl or upland birds or other game species. And what, again, that's rest periods for the wildlife that we're talking about. and whether the refuge in time encompasses no motorized vessels in specific pools to no hunting at all after a certain time period. Those are the kind of discussions that we're having and we'll continue to have. We'll continue to monitor the sale of state waterfowl stamps and looking at resident versus non-resident sales and where the trends are going there. But we continue to develop and restore and enhance more wetlands on properties that we currently own. We're looking at an additional 1,150 acres that we're planning to enhance on our properties within the next 5 years. Acquisitions, if we get potential and we can get it through the legislative process, acquiring more wetland acres is always at the forefront of our minds too. And we'll continue to seek public input in meetings. I will say I've received quite a few emails and phone calls discussing some of the main issues that Cheyenne Bottom specifically. And the phone calls and emails I've got in our conversations, they've been very supportive of what we're recommending with some of the changes that we're suggesting for this year. But again, this conversation will continue. This is something that we're taking seriously and is going to take some time to work out and really monitor and figure out whether we have problems in certain spots or we don't. And so with that, I would take any questions.
Are there any questions for Stuart?
Stuart, Commissioner Spohr, very good presentation. The one issue that I think everybody's having is the quality of the hunting experience we're having on public lands. And that's one thing your graphs didn't show was harvest rates, birds per person, or do you have anything that shows that from, harvest data per person or per day?
I don't right off the top of my head now, but I can get that to you. I don't have it readily available on my computer, but my staff does have information like that I could share with all of you.
I think, the Commissioner Spohr, again, the emails and the phone calls that I received were primarily Neosho and the bottoms, but also trickled out to other state lands all across the state. And the bottom line was they didn't have a very good experience. Just too many people on too small grounds. And I guess, I recognize that, some of your areas didn't have that, but we certainly had that problem at some of the areas. Thank you.
Yeah, Stuart Strong again, and I agree with you. And that's why I feel like some of these regulation recommendations we're making this year with the motorized vessels there at the bottom is where we're allowing some rest periods for the waterfowl and the access restrictions there at Neosho, I think is a step in the right direction for creating a better quality hunt by keeping the birds on the property and around longer.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Stuart, a good report, a very good report. One of the things that I noticed in the graphs, though, is the resident numbers are declining. And sometimes at the same time, non-residents are increasing, but not necessarily in every case, as I remember your presentation. Is that a trend that we need to be concerned about, or does it have to do with the issue we're talking about where it's just too crowded and they're just choosing not to hunt?
Yeah, Stuart Strong, again, I appreciate that question. And that is something that we all are looking at as well. And that's a human dimensions aspect that I'm not necessarily the expert on, and I hate to make assumptions, but in our conversations, I think, this year we did see, like I was talking about, non-residents when they came, they stayed for a long period of time, and they residents might have showed up their normal hunt time to see a parking lot full of non-resident vehicles and decided not to hunt. Other conflicting activities going on. It could be a whole host of things that we haven't quite put our finger on yet, but it is something that is at the forefront of our conversation as well, that we hopefully can identify some factors that maybe we can take some action to help correct.
Okay. And another question or clarification, that the check-in, Is that daily or is that
Yes.
one time? That's every day. So
That's every day. So it's pretty much a per day indicator. Yeah.
okay. All right. Thank you. And then Mr. Chairman or whoever, could we get a copy of that presentation as well as Matt's forwarded to us?
Yeah, I can forward you all my presentation. Sure.
Can take care of that too. If you send it to me, I can take care of it.
Okay.
That'd
And
be good.
Matt Peak's presentation as well.
I could take care of that.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for Stuart?
I have a question. The time frame limits of access for motorized boats at Neosho, you don't have anything like that on Cheyenne Bottoms. Can you explain why you wouldn't also have a access time in the mornings there as well? Because those two, in the emails that I read, those were the two key areas and the complaints were very similar. So it seems like some of the approaches should be similar. So that's my question. Why no time frame limitations at Cheyenne Bottoms? And my second is simply a comment that while sometimes we assess as hunters quality by our harvest, did I get one? Did I get my limit? Sometimes it really is the experience too. And so I hope when we're evaluating quality, there's more to it than just the take home.
Yeah, Stuart Schrog again. Thanks for those questions, Commissioner Sell. Rest assured, access restrictions at the bottom was one of the big conversations we had when we decided to do what we were recommending at Neosho. We're talking about a little smaller scale at Neosho versus the bottoms and how we manage people, how we manage hunters. To be quite honest, we wanted to try this at Neosho for this upcoming season. And again, I want to reiterate that it's not just motorized vessels, it's any access, whether you're walking in, paddling in, or motorized vessel in. What we're proposing is you can't be in the water prior to 5 a.m. and have to be out within an hour after legal sunset. We have the same problems at the bottoms magnified, but when you think of the number of boat ramps, the number of people, and how we manage that in an effective manner was a big issue for us. The fact that we're already recommending several regulatory changes at the bottoms was part of the discussion too. But as I mentioned in closing, that is probably the number one issue that we're going to be addressing for next season at the bottoms, is that access issue, not only at the bottoms, but at McPherson Wetlands as well.
Gerald here. Stuart, by next season, are you referring to this coming fall?
What I'm going to recommend and coming up here in a bit for the reference document is asking for the access restrictions at Neosho for the upcoming 21-22 waterfowl season. For Cheyenne Bottoms, we're looking at the 22-23 season is probably what we're looking at a recommendation.
Okay. Any other questions for Stuart? Well, hearing none, I think you're up next for the public lands regulation.
We did have a hand raised there at the end. Sorry,
Okay,
Gerald.
go ahead.
Let me see if I can find it. Well, I thought we did.
Well, if it comes back up, we can deal
Oh,
with
just
it.
a thumbs up. Okay, never mind. Move on.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Stuart.
Nicholas Brome down there. Oh, you should be unmuted now, Nicholas.
Yep, thanks. Nicholas Bame out of Kansas City. I wanted to sort of address Commissioner Goodfeller's comments just from the anecdotal perspective of someone who spends a lot of time duck hunting on the public lands. One thing that I noticed over the last couple of presentations is that our state waterfowl stamps sales for residents have very slowly increased, which is a good thing. But as we saw today, the volume of residents on some of our big properties is going down. And I think that he's right on track with his thoughts that maybe the hunting experience is just not as good as it has been. So I wanted to kind of confirm that. I mean, I'm out of Kansas City, but I traveled to Cheyenne Bottoms, and I've hunted all of those wetlands except for Slate Creek, and have experienced that myself, where it's like, usually I have to drive around to the different pools and hope to find one that doesn't have more than a couple trucks at it. So I think you're exactly right with what you're thinking. And I also wanted to say, Stuart and the staff, I really appreciate you guys taking this seriously and looking at things that hopefully will help slow down some of the intensity and the pressure. And I know for myself, like, I have a boat with a mud motor, and that's not going to stop me from hunting Cheyenne Bottoms or some of these other places. I'll just switch, right? I have a kayak too. I will find ways to continue to successfully hunt, and I think that the changes will really help make the hunting experience better without making it too hard for people to hunt. You know, what you've proposed, none of those are unreasonable restrictions from my one individual person's perspective. So thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spohr here. I guess for the commission and Stuart and everybody involved, the commission has just had hundreds of phone calls and emails, you know, talking about, you know, the lack of quality hunting. And I guess it's starting to become very apparent to us and the commission, and I think everybody in the agency, that this is not a good trend for Kansas. And I guess I'm thinking about, when I have people start approaching me about, you know, what have we done? You know, what am I going to be able to tell them that they're going to be able to come out next year and have a reasonably good experience, you know, in one of our wetlands? I guess I'm still struggling somewhat with, are we doing enough now? Are we going to have to do more next year to curve this trend? Thank you.
Any other questions, Brad?
Oh, thanks, Brad Loveless. I might just comment, respond to Commissioner Spohr. Certainly, this is adaptive management. So we are taking some steps now, as you saw, making some recommendations, but certainly not taking anything off the table, trying to gather more information over time. You know, we've felt pretty strongly that last year was a lot of factors came together to make not only our the ducks stay here, weather conditions, as Stuart mentioned, and factors in other states. I wouldn't say it was a perfect storm, but it was a pretty good one. And so one of our questions is, how will conditions line up in the coming waterfowl season as they did last season? So that causes us to, you know, we have lots of options that we've talked about. Stuart mentioned a lot more. And I can tell you, and Commissioner Spohr, you know this, all of you commissioners who talk with our public land managers know just how driven they are to produce the best quality habitat they can and the best hunting experiences they can. So they eat and sleep this stuff. And so I think they really are applying their best judgment to this issue. And we absolutely will continue to have these discussions and make changes over time that you know seem warranted. But we by no means see this as a short conversation we're having. This will be an annual conversation, and we'll see how these changes impact things this year. But we'll be talking to you during the season and after next season to say, was it enough? Do we have the same things occur again? And we need to redouble our efforts, consider big picture changes. Some of those are pretty momentous, particularly if we talk about changing the length of season for non-residents where they have to apply. But one thing I'd point out, we looked at those numbers of the average number of days that those non-residents stayed. And if my recollection, Stuart, was that they all averaged around 3 days. It seemed like that was the big average. So the idea that the average non-resident stayed and camped out for extended periods, well, we know some did that. That wasn't average based on our data. And so those kind of revelations come to us, and we factor that into, if that were the case, if we had 5 day segments for non-residents, wouldn't matter, right? They're still going to come hunt for 3 or so days and head out. So we're trying to look at things that will have a positive impact, but certainly appreciate the comments that you and a number of people have made. The gentleman that just spoke, that's important data to us. And even though it is somewhat anecdotal, nevertheless, it's valid. And you folks have been hunting for a long time, and so that carries weight with us. So we will continue to look at this, and over time, as we focus on this, regulations that are more impactful may be warranted, and we'll be talking about those for next season.
Feller, one of the things that's going to be important for us to understand, I mean, the numbers and the graphs that we saw clearly show that the days in the field really haven't increased, but there's clearly a widespread perception that there was overcrowding this year at a lot of the areas. And so there's a real gap there between perception and the numbers. And at some point we've got to get our arms around what's creating that perception, and whether it's the experience or it's no shortage of ducks this year, I don't think. So I think that what we have to spend more time trying to understand.
Yeah, Stuart Strug, Commissioner Gefeller, I think one of the things that we discussed a lot in regards to your question was a lot of Kansas residents who were used to showing up to their favorite duck spot midweek that historically wouldn't find very many folks there. They found non-residents there that were staying, like we talked about, for weeks on end. Where in historic years, they weren't there midweek. And I think a lot of that factors into the perception is that they'd go out to their favorite spot and find folks there any day of the week, where they didn't necessarily encounter that in previous seasons. And I will say this too, and I will forward you all some more harvest data, but we did have some properties that had record harvests this year. I mean, Jamestown, they shot almost 4,500 ducks this year. 2018, they shot around 3,200 ducks. Last year was a little over 2,500 ducks. So there were some bright spots and some places that did see record harvest. So I will gladly share more of that information with you all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments for Stuart? Mike?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I just want to assure everybody, commissioners especially, I sat through the Zoom meeting that Stuart set up with his area managers, and I was so impressed with, as involved as they were throughout the season, as thoughtful as they were with their perceptions of what they saw and how they wanted to deal with this. They are extremely concerned about their hunter satisfaction. They're extremely concerned about the areas that they manage. And so I just want you to be rest assured, this isn't over. They're going to continue to deal with this, but they also want to be careful and not do something that'll have unintended consequences and punish other hunters or other groups that we're not going to actually control with some of these. So these guys are really focused on this right now, and I was extremely impressed with them. So these guys are working hard to make this work.
Okay. Any other
Commissioner Spoor, Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, but Neosho and the Bod was non-resident hunters outnumbered resident hunters for the year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. What's the percentage of deer permits for non-residents and residents in Kansas? What's the split? Is it? Can anybody answer that?
I can't.
About 80-20.
Okay, that's my point, is the residents of Kansas get 80% of the permits and non-resident gets 20. And now all of a sudden we've got two popular waterfowl areas that it's the percent is skewed. I guess that's something to let the commission and the agency stew on. Is
Commissioner Sill, the permit ratio, if I remember my numbers right, is about 23-24% non-resident deer permits to resident permits. In Unit 16, in 2019, 60% of the bucks harvested were by non-residents. Units 112, and I want to say 7 is 7 North Central Kansas. It was 40 to 50% of the antlered bucks were taken by non-residents. So you can have a percentage statewide, but there are pockets where the non-residents are, where it is raising havoc for the resident hunters. It's a similar or analogous situation, I think, with the duck hunting with the bottoms and Neosho. You get nice areas and the non-residents do push the residents out. I'm not sure that that's what's happening, but I'm really concerned that I do see some parallels in the trends. And we can have scientific data about how many ducks are shot, and harvest, and days of field, but in reality, in the end, the hunter's perception of what's happening is going to rule whether they buy licenses, whether they continue to hunt or not. Our scientific data isn't going to mean anything to them when their experience is different than that. And so I think it is pretty important that anecdotal evidence, which is scientific evidence, though it does not come in the same quality that double-blind studies do, it is still valid scientific evidence. And so I think we do need to consider those trends because we already have existing data of what's happening in hunting other species.
Okay, any other comments for Stuart at this time? This is going to be an ongoing project. Stuart, go ahead and start with the public lands regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission. Before I do, Stuart Strong again, Public Lands Director. I might have failed to mention that Jason Wagner is the manager at Cheyenne Bottom, so I wanted to make sure that he got the recognition that he deserved. And Assistant Secretary Mike Miller asked me to kind of readdress an issue that was brought up at the last commission meeting in the evening session that I was unable to attend, and that's in regards to e-bikes and the use of them for hunting purposes on wildlife areas. And I believe it was relayed that is a prohibited activity, and that is the case under KAR 115.813 under our motorized vehicles and aircraft regulation. It states that the motorized vehicles shall be operated on department roads and parking areas. And what's defined as a motorized vehicle does include electric or gasoline powered two-wheeled vehicles. So per the regulation, we do not allow e-bikes on our wildlife areas and state fishing lakes currently. The state parks do not allow them as well off-road. I believe they do have some designated trails where they might allow them, but not off-road. So I just want to ensure that everybody was on the same page and received the correct message there. And quite honestly, that's not necessarily a change in regulation that we're looking to entertain in the near future. So with that, I will move on to KAR 115.8-1 subsection E, which is our public lands special use restrictions document. This is something that we annually look at and amend. I know this year is a very long list. Hopefully, I promise that next year's list won't be this long. I plan to go through these relatively quickly, Mr. Chairman, and I will go down section by section. And unless you stop me with questions, I'd be glad to entertain those, but I will just keep on going down the list, if that's okay with you. All right, starting off with access restrictions under Region 1 for Sand Sage Bison Range and Wildlife Area, changing any pasture where bison are present to access subject to posted notice. And that's due to the fact that the location of the bison changes at times too. We move them around pasture to pasture. Under Region 3, Grand Osage Wildlife Area, access by special permit only and access through main gates only. That's the change there at the guard entrance. As I just proposed in the waterfowl presentation for Neosho Wildlife Area, no access into the wetland before 5 a.m. and must exit the wetland within an hour after sunset. Section 2, under age restrictions, Region 2, for Hillsdale Wildlife Area, removing the wording all species, all seasons to all activities. Same for the Kansas River. And for Indian Hills Wildlife Area, that's a name change from Melbourne Wildlife Area. Striking, hunting, fishing, all species. Again, we're changing that to all activities. For Milford Wildlife Area, instead of all species, all seasons, we're going to all activities, and the same with Perry Wildlife Area. Under the no alcohol section, we're just adding Oak Mills Wildlife Area that was not on the list before. Region 3, for Maxwell Wildlife Area, it did say at the shooting range. It's anywhere on Maxwell Wildlife Area for no alcohol. Section 4, under all non-toxic shot for Region 1, Haines State Fishing Lake we're including. Region 2, Benedictine Bottoms, we're just adding the word bottoms. And then Burr Oak, there was a typo. It should have been 2 R's instead of 1 for Burr Oak Wildlife Area. Adding Dalby Wildlife Area, Elwood Wildlife Area, and Oak Mills Wildlife Area for all non-toxic shot. And that's because if you go to Section 5, non-toxic shot for designated dove fields, we had those properties listed there. And so we're just moving them from Section 4 or Section 5 to Section 4. So under Section 5, non-toxic shot designated dove fields, we're adding Buck Creek Wildlife Area, removing Dalby and Elwood and Oak Mills, adding the Richard B. Hanger Wildlife Area property, which is a new donation within the last year and a half, and adding Rutledge Wildlife Area. Okay, under boating restrictions, Section 6, subsection A, no motorized boats under Region 1. Like I discussed earlier for Cheyenne Bottoms, we're striking from April 15th through August 15th, no boats permitted from 10 a.m. through 5 p.m. That's old historic language that we don't need anymore. So we're changing that wording to no boats permitted from April 15th through August 15th. And then Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Area Pool 3A, no motorized boats. And then for Pool 4A, after 1 p.m., no motorized boats. But again, non-motorized vessels and walk-in traffic, walk-in hunting is allowed in 4A after 1 p.m. Under Region 3, for Meridazine Wildlife Area, we're striking no motorized boats except in Unit A in the boat lane and Unit G. And we're adding McPherson Valley Wetlands to the no motorized boats section. And then just a slight typo there below that for Neosho, it said MO, motorized motorcraft, just change that to correct no motorized watercraft. Subsection B, no gasoline engine powered boats. Region 2, for Perry Wildlife Area, we're adding Sunset Ridge and Rucker Marshes. Gas powered are allowed there. Meridazine Wildlife Area, all marshes except Unit A East boat lane only, and Unit G, no out of water propelled or driven watercraft permitted at any time. And then under the no wake, Section C, the following department waters is a change from the following lakes require all motorized vessels to be operated at no wake speeds. We're adding Barber State Fishing Lake, again, Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Area, Concannon State Fishing Lake, Ford State Fishing Lake, Goodman State Fishing Lake, Hain, Hodgman, Kiowa, and Saline State Fishing Lakes. For Region 2, Atchison, Brown, Douglas, Geary, Leavenworth, Lyon, Miami, Middle Creek, Nebo, Osage, Shawnee, and Washington State Fishing Lakes. For Region 3, including Bourbon, Chase, Montgomery, and Neosho State Fishing Lakes. Under the close to all hunting section under Region 2, we're striking Green Wildlife Area and including Osawatomie Dam Fishing Area. Under equipment restrictions for hunting, subsection B, no center fire rifles and handguns. Region 2, we're adding Douglas State Fishing Lake and Wildlife Area, as well as Leavenworth State Fishing Lake and Wildlife Area, and Shawnee State Fishing Lake and Wildlife Area. For Region 3, McPherson Valley Wetlands and Neosho Wildlife Area. Under the shotgun and archery only section, Region 3, we're eliminating Shoal Creek Wildlife Area. We're eliminating all of the old subsection D for shotgun archery and rimfire only, and replacing that with a new subsection D, shot shell and archery only, to include under Region 1, Sand Sage Bison Range, the North Pasture units only. Region 3, Shoal Creek Wildlife Area, and for statewide designated weehaw and iWeehaw tracts. Under disabled access hunting for Region 1, an inclusion of Pratt Sand Hills Wildlife Area. And under Region 2, the Richard B. Hanger Wildlife Area, special permit required for all activities on the entire wildlife area. Under no swimming, Region 2, changing the Melbourne wording to Indian Hills Wildlife Area for no swimming. For refuges, under subsection A, refuge area closed to all activities year-round. Region 1, Lovewell Wildlife Area, designated land area. Under Region 2, we're striking the Milford Wildlife Area, Steve Lloyd Refuge Area, as it will be included in a subsequent section. Under subsection D, refuge area closed to hunting year-round, close to all activities, September 1st through March 31st, striking Region 1, Lovewell Wildlife Area in the designated land area, as that was changed to an earlier subsection, relocated to an earlier subsection. Under G, refuge area close to all activities, October 1st through January 15th. Under Region 2, adding Milford Wildlife Area. Under seasonal closures, subsection E, open to upland bird hunting Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. We're removing Dalby Wildlife Area. Under subsection F, closed to fishing 9/15 through 4/15. Under Region 2, we're striking Meridazine Wildlife Area marshes only. And then under subsection G, new subsection, close to pheasant hunting for 2021 and 2024. Under Region 2 at Dalby Bottoms Wildlife Area, we're undertaking a pheasant translocation project, and Jeff Prendergast is going to speak real briefly on that project.
Okay, yeah, so for Dalby, Dalby Bottoms is a mitigation property in the northeast part of the state that's extremely isolated from any existing populations. There's a nearby pheasant population, so we're confident that it can support pheasants, and the manager has been managing for pheasant habitat. So given that the property is isolated from an existing any existing populations, we plan to translocate 50 birds a year for 3 years, and we'd like to remove hunting on that population until it gets established.
Any questions for Jeff on that? Okay, moving on under shooting ranges, under Region 2, striking Shawnee State Fishing Lake. And under Region 3, we're striking Maxwell Wildlife Refuge. I know that was a lot, but if any of you have any questions about any of it, I'd be glad to answer them.
Commissioner Spohr, Jeff, where are you getting the pheasants?
It'll depend annually on where we can get permission to trap from and where our populations are at. We did do an attempt last year and focused mostly on Kerwin, but some of our surrounding wildlife areas. part of where we go may depend on technique we use. We were using some thermal imagery with drone. We've been playing around with that, but the federal wildlife refuges don't allow the use of drones. And so if we use that, we won't be able to utilize Kerwin. So.
Thank you.
Jeff, Commissioner Gefeller, what's your ratio, rooster to hen ratio on those 50?
It'll be one cock to 4 hens.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for Stuart or for Jeff?
Well, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but thank you for the time today.
Well, you're very welcome, and it was very interesting. Okay.
Just a second, Gerald. Commissioner Lauren had a
sure.
Question.
Commissioner Sill, I just had one quick question, and it's not a big deal, but I'm curious on these daily hunt permits. What's a penalty for somebody who doesn't get one of those and hunts those areas?
Well, Commissioner Sill, Stuart Trog again, that is our iSportsman, where our iSportsman program fits in, and that it's a misdemeanor offense, but that's to be set by the local county judge, and it depends on a lot of different factors. I don't know that we've written a lot of tickets for that. We've written warnings for it. So I don't know that we have a lot of data out there showing the deposition of those charges. I do know if I have staff that have written that, so I could reach out to them to see what court costs and fines were previously, and I could let you know what those were.
I was just curious because I know the paper permits run out sometimes. And I got in a pickle last fall with my phone was dead. My friend's phone is not a smartphone and there weren't any paper ones. So what do you do? So I just was kind of curious on that because the paper, I know there's all kinds of managerial reasons why it doesn't work. But there's other reasons to have them available to folks too. So I just was kind of curious.
Right. Yeah, Stuart Trog again, and I appreciate that question, Commissioner Sill, and that's something that we continue to talk about as well. As we're trying to transition away from the paper permits as much as possible and rely on the electronic version, but knowing that there are some lapses in technology with cell service and things like that. So we've tried to make that available. And it boils down to officer discretion too in the field. If we feel like somebody's honestly can't get checked in and is just wanting to hunt and stuff, that comes into our discretion. And if we can make that an educational moment versus writing a ticket and making them show up to court, we're going to choose that route predominantly.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Stuart?
Commissioner Spohr, I guess a statistic from me is I've hunted waterfowl in western Kansas and reservoirs my whole life, and I've never seen so many non-resident waterfowl hunters in my life. And that's just me telling you that it was a problem for me this year. Thank you.
Any more questions? Any more comments? Then Kent and Jeff, you have a presentation.
This is Jeff Prendergast, small game specialist, Hayes, Kansas. I don't have a PowerPoint of any sort, but we'll be addressing the KR 11525-1A and 1B open seasons for pheasants and quail. As we spoke last time about this, we were looking for ways to, as we reviewed our small game regulations, we were looking at ways at cleaning up the regulations. And one thing that was pointed out was our Kansas youth season. We looked at many ways. It's normally an underutilized season, so we were looking at ways to increasing participation. Several things were considered. In the end, we landed on the recommendation to increase the average age or the age for participation to anyone ages 17 and under. That will align it with our the move the department has made to align our youth seasons, as well as increase the daily bag limit to the full daily bag limit of 4 pheasants per day and 8 quail per day to make it consistent with the regular season bag limits. With that, I'll stand in for any questions.
Are there any questions for Jeff? Well, let's move on.
The second one I had was for KAR 115-3-1 game bird possession. Historically, our regulation read that you had to maintain foot, plumage, or some part by which sex could be determined. In order to clearly identify what our department considered proof of sex, we removed the or some part, so that now pheasants must retain either a foot or a plumage in order to qualify for the proof of sex. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you. I'll pass it to Kent then.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you, commissioners. Sharing my screen here. And wanted to talk briefly about our prairie chicken seasons. And this is really just a reiteration of the presentation I gave at the last meeting. But just a reminder that in Kansas, we currently have an early season, which is September 15th to October 15th, and then a regular season that starts the third Saturday in November and runs through January 31st. And we do have a closed Southwest unit where our predominantly lesser prairie chicken population occurs. And also a reminder that that early season first started in 1989. And as Jeff mentioned, we have a couple of reasons for addressing prairie chicken seasons now. First, we have had for a number of years various comments on our prairie chicken hunter activity survey that our hunters, both resident and non-resident, would like the ability to hunt that during they have a hard time hunting during the regular season because of other obligations, teal seasons, other things that they kind of prioritize. And we've also had requests for having the season open during the pheasant and quail opener, which is the second Saturday in November. As Jeff mentioned, the Small Game Committee did do a regulations review, and this was identified, extending the prairie chicken season was identified as an opportunity to simplify regulations. And we do have a number of data sources for prairie chickens in Kansas. In terms of populations, we track prairie chicken populations through our annual ground-based LEC surveys that staff conduct. And then we also have aerial surveys that are conducted annually for lesser prairie chickens and every 3 years, including 2021. We just wrapped up our prairie chicken surveys for greater prairie chickens, which we do every 3 years. Additionally, we track hunter activity and harvest. We've been tracking it through the Small Game Harvest Survey since 1970. And then in 2012, we started up the Prairie Chicken Hunter Activity Survey, which gives us a better sample size and a better sample of the prairie chicken stamp buyers in the state. And so we track data through those 4 sources. And as we've discussed before, prairie chicken harvest and hunting effort has declined dramatically over the last 40 years. The peak of harvest and hunter effort occurred in 1981 when around 100,000 greater prairie chickens were harvested in Kansas, but has declined substantially to the point where in the bars here is the estimated harvest since 2012. You see that we've probably averaged around 1,000 birds harvested throughout the entire state since 2012, and our prairie chicken hunters are estimated on average about 1,200 throughout the state. In terms of population trends, we have seen some declines, especially in our eastern portion of our greater prairie chicken range. So specifically in the graph on the lower left, you see that the blue line is the Osage Cuestas, where we have some of the longer term ground survey data for the state. And you'll see that those prairie chicken populations have declined substantially. And we've seen relatively substantial declines in the Flint Hills as well, which is the red line. But the Smoky Hills in the north central part of the state has remained relatively stable, especially over the last 20, 25 years. But again, we feel that we have 4 primary reasons that we feel justified in exploring this as an option for the state. First is that harvest is not likely to be additive. As we talked about last meeting, between 1,600 and 900 prairie chickens are harvested each year. And of course, again, we are able to track that annually. And based on our last aerial survey population estimates, we estimated about 78,000 prairie chickens in the state of lesser or greater prairie chickens in the state of Kansas. And in a very conservative estimate, we would be harvesting as much as 3% of the population, which again, based on research, is not having a detrimental effect of harvest on the population. But I do believe that would be overestimating the amount of harvest, and we're really probably closer to that 1 or 2% of the population being harvested currently. The second reason is that there's relatively low hunter access to prairie chicken hunting throughout the state. So in blue on the map on your screen is the greater prairie chicken range in the state. Of course, in the southwestern part of the state, the pink is the closed unit. And then in black is all of the public hunting access that was open during the past year. So this is our wildlife areas, core wildlife areas, and our walk-in hunting access program properties as well. And of course, the large black areas there are those wetlands, the reservoirs, those kind of things. So unfortunately, I couldn't just separate all that out. But point being, especially in more traditional stronghold prairie chickens, especially in the Flint Hills and the eastern and northwestern portions of the Smoky Hills, there's still large chunks of area that are not publicly accessible. Certainly they could be accessed through private landowners, but there's not a ton of large areas that prairie chicken hunters looking for public access are going to find. Next, there's relatively low hunter participation, especially in the eastern portion of the range. And so we went over this table briefly last meeting, but as you can see, when we started the prairie chicken survey in 2012, 2013, we had a relatively large number of eastern counties represented in this graph, or this table, which shows the highest proportion of hunter days hunted out of all the counties that were hunted. And then as we go through time, and as we've seen the declines in prairie chicken populations in the eastern counties, we see those counties drop off, and where they're not having much of any hunter effort or harvest. And so basically hunters are moving to where they're seeing larger number of birds and have a greater likelihood of success in harvesting a bird. And then finally, declining populations across the range, not only in Kansas, are due to habitat loss and alteration, not harvest. Harvest is just such a small proportion of the overall population that the larger landscape scale effects that are impacting our prairie chicken populations, which are primarily habitat fragmentation and loss and declining habitat quality. And these are factors that have been in place for a number of years now. These are what's driving greater prairie chicken populations, and harvest really is, we do not believe has a large negative effect on our prairie chicken populations. And again, we did ask hunters, prairie chicken hunters during the last prairie chicken hunter activity survey, whether they would support or oppose expanding the season, and the reasons why they may or may not be in support of that. And as we discussed overall, in both years that we've asked that question, they would like the ability to hunt prairie chickens during the opener of the pheasant and quail season to make it more of a true upland opener. And then also the other second highest reason was that they would take advantage of those additional season days because they're either not prioritizing or just have other things going on during the normal early season. And so I'll end with kind of our final with the staff recommendation, which is to create a continuous single prairie chicken season that runs from September 15th through January 31st. Again, reiterate that we are not recommending any changes to bag limits, and we are not recommending any changes to the open or closed units within the state. With that, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Kent? Well, hearing none, I guess we'll go on.
Thank you.
Levi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the KR 11525-9A, which is the deer season open seasons bag limits on our military subunits. So I'll start with Smoky Hill. They've requested the same dates as the statewide season, and they're wanting to allow the same number of antlerless permits that are allowed in that unit, which is 5 on Smoky Hill. Fort Riley has requested the same dates as statewide, except that they would like to have the exception of archery days for individuals authorized by the fort of September 1st, 2021 through September 12th. And then from January 1st, 2022 through January 31st, 2022, typically individuals authorized by them are military personnel that were either deployed or going to be going on deployment to give them some additional opportunities to hunt. Then they also would like to have additional days for designated persons, the youth, and people with disabilities of October 9th through October 11th. And then that would take the place of the pre-rut firearms antlerless season. So no pre-rut firearms antlerless season on Fort Riley. And then they're requesting firearms season dates of November 26th through November 28th, December 18th through December 23rd, and December 26th through December 28th. That would be the same number of days as the statewide season, just different dates that it would apply. So they'd still only have 12 days of firearms antler deer hunting on Fort Riley. And then they would like to close and not have an extended firearms antlerless only season in January on Fort Riley. And they are wanting to only have one antlerless whitetail permit valid on Fort Riley, similar to the main deer management unit that they're in. That takes us to Fort Leavenworth, which they're requesting same seasons, except that their open firearm season, they are requesting it to be November 13th through November 14th, November 20th through November 21st, November 25th through November 28th, and December 4th through December 5th, and December 11th through December 12th. That's still the same 12 days as the regular statewide season number of days, just different dates. As you can see, that's mostly weekends except the Thanksgiving holiday. And then they're requesting that they have the extended firearm season for antlerless only white-tailed deer be January 1st through January 23rd, the same as our longest season in units that have that designated. And then extended archery season for antlerless deer from January 24th of 2022 through January 31st of 2022. So finishing out January at that. And so that wraps up the military subunit seasons and their exceptions to the statewide. Typically, we vote on that in June at the June Commission meeting. So I will take questions if there are any.
Are there any questions for Levi? Okay, you want to go to the 4 series?
All right, Levi Jasper Emporia. Yeah, this is 115 4-4, which is big game legal equipment and taking methods. Specifically, we are addressing, as directed by the commission, we are drafting an amendment to this regulation in consideration of the fire stick as legal equipment during the muzzleloader only season. And so that will be, I believe, coming for the next meeting. And then the other current change that we're looking at is that current regulations require deer and elk hunters to wear orange clothing and an orange hat while hunting during an open firearm seasons. Some hunters may have difficulties wearing a hat, and so we could accommodate them by allowing them to wear a hat or other garment. Hats require that not less than 50% bright orange color and equal portion, which is visible from all directions. That requirement would still be in place. So anything worn besides a hat that would qualify as a garment would still have to be at least 50% bright orange and be visible from all directions. And so that concludes the recommendations for the 115 4-4 big game legal equipment. And I will take questions if any.
Does anybody have any questions for Levi on this matter? Well, hearing none, I guess you've done a good job with presentation, Levi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
According to my briefing book, that is all we have for this session. I'm going to recess and we're going to reconvene at 6:30. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'll see you at 6:30.